Scene 1. The job. Diane's F-150 rattled over the bridge crossing Nakin Creek. The truck bed loaded with enough lumber and tools to rebuild half a house. The concrete span was newer than it looked, maybe 10 years old. But something about crossing it made her teeth itch. Below, dark water slid over rocks with a sound like whispering. She'd almost turned around twice already. Once at the construction detour that had added 40 minutes to her drive, and again when she'd passed the hand-painted sign for Ironwood Retreat and realized just how far from civilization this place sat. But Danny needed new cleats for soccer. Sarah needed a winter coat that actually fit. And her mother's furnace was making that grinding sound again. $800 for 3 weeks of work wasn't great money, but it was money she didn't have. The parking lot opened up ahead, gravel and cracked asphalt forming a rough semicircle in front of a cluster of buildings. A main office anchored the center, with maybe 10 small units arranged around it like sentries. Everything looked well-maintained but tired, the kind of place that had been nice once and was holding on through sheer stubbornness. A man waited by what looked like a pool house, hands shoved deep in a work jacket, despite the September warmth. He straightened as Diane pulled up, and the relief on his weathered face was almost comical. She cut the engine and climbed out, work boots hitting gravel with a solid crunch. The man was already walking toward her, maybe late 40s, with the kind of sun-damaged skin and calloused hands that spoke of decades doing outdoor work. "Frank Harnan," he said, extending his hand. "You must be Diane Matthews." His grip was firm but brief. No lingering handshake nonsense. She appreciated that. "You sounded pretty desperate on the phone." "Desperate's one word for it." Frank gestured toward the pool house behind him. Had 3 contractors turn down the job. 4th one took one look and drove off without a word. Diane walked past him toward the structure in question, her professional eye already cataloging problems. The roof sagged in the middle like a swayback horse. Water stains darkened the eaves. The foundation showed cracks wide enough to slip a finger into. Beyond it, she could see the pool itself, and her steps slowed. The pool had been drained, or mostly drained. Maybe 3 feet of stagnant water sat at the bottom, black with algae and rot and God knew what else. Leaves and debris floated on the surface like a parpet. The smell hit her even from 20 feet away, thick and organic, the scent of things decomposing in standing water. "When's the last time you cleaned that?" she asked. Frank came up beside her, staring at the pool with the expression of a man who'd made peace with an uncomfortable truth. 79. Tried to drain it completely. Water kept seeping back. Figure it's connected to the creek somehow. Underground water table. Gave up trying to fight it. Diane walked to the pool's edge and looked down. The water was opaque, impossible to see through. Dead leaves clustered at one end. Something had formed patterns in the algae, swirls and whorls that looked almost deliberate. Then the water moved. Not ripples from wind. The whole surface shifted, like something large had rolled over just beneath. Diane took a step back. "You got an animal living in there?" "No animals." Frank's voice was flat, certain. "Just old water. Been sitting there for years now. Tends to move sometimes. Probably gas from decomposition." Probably. Diane had been around enough job sites to know when someone was lying to make her feel better. She looked at Frank, at the tight set of his jaw, the way his hands had gone back into his pockets, like he was keeping them from doing something. "You said on the phone the pool house needs structural work. Foundation, roof, maybe some interior repairs." "That's right. Whole thing's gonna collapse if someone doesn't shore it up soon. Been putting it off too long." Frank pulled out a key ring and gestured toward the pool house door. "Want to see inside?" Diane nodded, already running numbers in her head. 3 weeks was tight for this kind of work, but doable if the damage wasn't worse than it looked. And it was always worse than it looked. The interior was a disaster. Rotted floor joists sagged beneath her feet. The ceiling showed water damage in spreading brown stains. One wall had visible mold climbing from baseboard to shoulder height. But it was fixable. Everything was fixable if you had the right tools and enough stubbornness. "I can do it," she said, walking through the space and mentally cataloging materials. "But 3 weeks is tight. I'll need to work long days." "You can work your own hours." Frank leaned against the doorframe, backlit by the afternoon sun. "Just be done before dark. Every day." Diane turned to look at him. "I work until the work's done. Can't promise I'll knock off at 5 every day." "Not 5, dark." Frank met her eyes. "Sunset's around 7 these days. You need to be packed up and in your unit by then. No exceptions." The way he said it, flat and final, made something in Diane's stomach tighten. She'd worked for paranoid contractors before, guys who didn't want her on site after hours because insurance or liability or whatever excuse they needed. But this felt different. Why? Because that's the job. 800 for 3 weeks, your own hours during daylight, but you're off this property before sunset. You can stay in Unit 4, no charge for the room. Take it or leave it. $800. Danny's cleats, Sarah's coat, Mom's furnace. "I'll take it." Frank nodded and pulled an iron horseshoe from his jacket pocket. Old, pitted with rust, heavy when he placed it in her palm. "Put this above your door. Inside, above the frame. There's already a nail there." Diane stared at the horseshoe. "I'm not superstitious." Neither was the last person who worked on this pool. Frank's voice went quieter, careful. "Found him face down in 2 feet of water. Heart attack, they said." But he was holding a picture of his daughter when they pulled him out. Daughter he hadn't spoken to in 5 years. The metal was cold against Diane's skin, heavier than it should be for its size. She looked past Frank, back toward the pool. The water sat perfectly still now, reflecting the sky like black glass. "What does a horseshoe have to do with—" "Just hang it." Frank turned and walked toward the main office. "You can start tomorrow. I'll leave a key to the pool house in your unit tonight. And Miss Matthews, don't go near that pool after sunset. Don't even look at it." Diane watched him cross the parking lot, his shoulders set in a way that suggested the conversation was over. She looked down at the horseshoe in her hand, then back at the pool. The water was moving again, slow, deliberate circles spreading from the center. No wind, not even a breeze. Diane's truck sat 20 feet away. Keys still in the ignition, $800 worth of lumber in the bed. She could load it all back up, drive home. Tell Danny he'd have to wait another month for cleats. Tell Sarah to make do with last year's coat. Or she could stay, fix the pool house. Ignore whatever weird small-town superstition Frank was caught up in. Get paid. 3 weeks. Get in, get out, get paid. Diane walked to her truck and tossed the horseshoe onto the dashboard. It landed with a heavy clunk, spinning once before settling. She started unloading lumber. Behind her, if she'd been watching, she would have seen the water in the pool go still, perfectly still, like it was holding its breath, waiting.
Scene 7. Trapped in the office. Diane made it halfway to Unit 4 before she realized she'd left the welding torch at the pool. $800 worth of equipment sitting beside the fence where she dropped it in her panic. She couldn't afford to replace it, couldn't afford to lose a single tool when she was barely making rent, as it was. She stood in the parking lot, truck keys in hand, looking back toward the pool house. The sun had just touched the horizon, painting everything in shades of blood and copper. Maybe 10 minutes of good light left, 10 minutes to run back, grab the torch, and get to safety. Or she could leave it, come back in the morning, accept the loss if it wasn't there. Diane thought about Danny's cleats, Sarah's winter coat, the furnace making that grinding sound. She ran back toward the pool. The torch sat exactly where she'd left it, beside the fence post she'd jammed into the gap. In the fading light, she could see the water had receded back into the pool, leaving dark stains on the concrete like accusation. Diane grabbed the torch and turned to run. The pool erupted, not exploding upward this time, pouring over the sides in sheets, gallons of black water flooding across the concrete in every direction, moving with purpose, spreading fast. Diane ran toward the parking lot, toward Unit 4 in safety and iron horseshoes above locked doors. The water cut her off. It poured across the path between her and the units, a river 3 feet deep and rising, moving faster than water should be able to move. She could see shapes in it, hands reaching, faces pressing up from beneath, mouths open and mouths, her truck's silent screams. 20 feet to her left. She pivoted, running for it. The water reached it first, surrounded the vehicle in a black moat, rising to the door handles, lapping at the windows. Too deep to wade through. Too alive to risk. Diane spun around, searching for any escape route. The water was everywhere now, flooding the parking lot, spreading toward the tree line, cutting off every path to safety. Except one. The pool house sat behind her. Dark. Waiting. But the office, the small corner office with the filing cabinet and desk, had its own door. Had an iron horseshoe above the threshold. Frank's father had put iron protection on every door in this compound. The water was moving toward her in a wave now, 3 feet high and building. This was what it wanted. She could feel it, the intelligence behind the flood. The kinship was hurting her, cutting off escape, forcing her into the one place it could trap her all night. But trapped in a room with iron protection was better than drowning in open ground. Diane ran for the pool house. The main door stood open, the larger room dark but empty of water. She crashed through it, the welding torch still in her grip, and looked for the office door. There, corner of the room, door standing ajar. She could see the desk through the opening, the filing cabinet, the small window. Behind her, the water hit the pool house entrance like a breaking dam, pouring through the doorway, flooding the main room in seconds, black and freezing and full of reaching hands. Diane lunged for the office door, threw herself inside, slammed it shut. Her hands found the deadbolt and twisted, locked. The office was small, maybe 10 by 12, a desk, a filing cabinet, one window, and the door she'd just locked. An iron horseshoe hung above the frame, old and pitted with rust. Thank God for Frank and his superstitions. Diane leaned against the door, breathing hard, listening. Silence, then water, the sound of it sloshing, moving, coming closer. She looked at the window. Water pressed against the glass from outside. Black pool water, thick with algae, forming a wall that blocked out the last of the sunset. She could see shapes moving through it, faces, hands pressing against the glass like aquarium fish. The door shuddered behind her. Diane jumped away from it. Water began seeping under the threshold. Just a thin trickle at first, but growing. The iron horseshoe above the door flickered faintly, or maybe that was just the light. Either way, it was holding, barely. Diane backed to the center of the room, torch still in her hands. The water spread across the floor, black and freezing, moving with purpose, searching. From outside came voices, dozens of them. All the people who'd drowned in that pool, all the estranged families, all the broken bonds crying out at once. And above them all, clear and terrible, Carol's voice. Diane. Dee, let me in. You're not her, Diane said to the empty office. Her voice shook. I'm cold, Di. So cold. The water's so deep and I can't swim anymore and you're not helping. Why won't you help me? The window cracked, a thin fracture running from corner to corner. I called you. 3 times I called after I left. You never answered. You let me drown in silence. That wasn't true. Carol had never called, had she? Diane's memory felt slippery. The fight had been so loud, so ugly. Had there been calls after? Had Carol tried to reach out after? Knocked on her door and Diane hadn't answered? Called the house and Diane had hung up when she heard her voice? You wished me gone, the voice continued. Softer now, sad. November 3rd, 1973. In Mom's kitchen. You screamed it. I wish you'd just disappear. And I did, Dee. I disappeared, and you never came looking. The water was ankle deep now. Diane climbed onto the desk, boots squelching. The torch was useless without fuel, but she held it anyway. Iron. It was iron. I'm sorry. The words came out before she could stop them. Carol, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I was angry and stupid, and I said something I can't take back. The water stopped rising. Then open the door. Let me in. We can talk. We can fix this. Diane looked at the door. Water pooled beneath it, dark and waiting. The iron horseshoe flickered again, definitely flickering now, like a light bulb about to die. Tell me something, Diane said, voice steadier now. Tell me something that happened in 1973. Silence. You can't, can you? Because you're not Carol. You're just wearing her shape, using her voice. But you don't know anything that happened after we stopped talking. The voices outside grew louder, angry now, furious. Blood calls to blood. You owe her. You owe us. The window exploded inward. Glass and water poured into the office in a wave. Diane scrambled onto the filing cabinet as the desk disappeared beneath black water. The torch fell from her hands, swallowed by the flood. The water was chest-deep in seconds, rising fast, too fast. Diane grabbed onto the top of the filing cabinet, pulling herself up. The metal was cold and slippery, but it was iron, and the water couldn't quite touch it. Recoiled from it, like it had from the fence posts. From the water below, Carol's face emerged. Not quite solid, made of pool water and rot, but recognizable. Her sister's face, twisted with grief and rage. You left me to drown in guilt, and now you'll drown in truth. More faces rose around Carol's. The other victims, all of them reaching, all of them screaming, all of them demanding payment for broken bonds and unspoken apologies. Diane clung to the filing cabinet, water lapping at her boots. The ceiling was 8 feet high. The water was at 6 feet and climbing. She was going to drown in this office, just like all the others, found face down with water in her lungs and a photograph in her hand. No. Diane let go of the cabinet with one hand and grabbed at the filing cabinet drawer. It was underwater now, but she wrenched it open. Frank's father's journal had to be in here, the one with the binding ritual, the one that explained how to fight this thing. Her hand closed on leather. She pulled out the journal, water streaming from its pages. The entries were barely legible, ink running, but she could make out enough. November 18, 1975. The kinship knows everything the estranged family member knows. Shared memories, private conversations, secrets never told to anyone else. Only way to identify it, ask about something that happened after the estrangement. It can't know what it never witnessed. Diane had already tested that. The thing wearing Carol's face couldn't answer questions about Sarah's middle name change, about anything that happened after 1973. She flipped pages frantically, searching for more. The water was at her waist now, the filing cabinet top barely keeping her above the surface. December 3rd, 1975. The kinship feeds on estrangement, but it doesn't just want drowning. It wants you to die estranged, to never reconcile. That's the real feast. The drowning is just how it takes you. If you reconcile before it can claim you, it loses its hold. Reconcile. Make peace. Peace. Heal the wound. But Carol wasn't here. Diane couldn't reconcile with a water demon wearing her sister's face. Another page, half dissolved, but the words were clear enough. January 10th, 1976. Tried speaking truth to the kinship. Full confession of my own estrangement with David. Spoke every word of anger, every moment of pride, every reason we'd fought. The kinship fed on it like honey. But then I spoke forgiveness. Forgave myself, forgave him, meant it, truly meant it. The kinship shrieked, retreated, cannot feed on healed bonds, cannot touch peace. Forgiveness. The water was at Diane's chest now. The filing cabinet was sinking, the weight of the flood pushing it down. She had maybe 30 seconds before she went under. Diane closed her eyes, thought about Carol. Not the water thing below, but the real Carol. Her sister. The girl who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd held her hand at their father's funeral, who'd shared secrets and clothes and dreams. The sister she'd hurt. I'm sorry, Diane said clearly, speaking to the memory, not the monster. Carol, I'm so sorry. I said terrible things. I was angry about the will, about Mom playing favorites, about feeling like I wasn't enough, and I took it out on you. I wished you'd disappear because I couldn't face how much I'd failed us both. The water slowed its rise, just slightly, but enough to notice. You didn't deserve that. You deserved a sister who could admit when she was wrong, who could say I'm sorry instead of letting pride poison everything. Diane opened her eyes. The water Carol hovered inches away, face shifting, uncertain. I can't change what I said, can't take back those words. But I can forgive myself for saying them, and I can forgive you for leaving. You had every right to leave. I gave you every reason. The water began to recede, and I can promise that when I get out of here, I'm calling you, the real you. And I'm saying all of this again, because you deserve to hear it, because we deserve better than 8 years of silence. Diane pulled.
Scene 3. First night. Unit 4 was nicer than Diane expected. Small but clean, with a kitchenette, that actually had pots and pans, a bathroom with water that ran clear instead of rusty, and a bed that didn't sag in the middle. She'd stayed in worse places. Way worse. She locked the door behind her and stood in the middle of the sitting room, still holding her duffel bag, listening to the silence. No sounds from other units. No traffic noise. Just the faint whisper of wind through trees and the distant murmur of Naken Creek, somewhere beyond the tree line. Diane set her bag on the bed and started unpacking. 2 changes of work clothes, toiletries, a paperback western she'd been trying to finish for 3 months. The photo fell out when she unzipped the inner pocket. She stared at it, pulse quickening. The picture showed 2 girls at a lake, maybe 10 and 7 years old, standing knee-deep in water, with their arms around each other's shoulders, both grinning at the camera with gap-toothed smiles. Summer of 1955, if Diane's memory was right. Lake Conroe, the year before their father died. Diane and Carol. Before everything. She turned the photo over with shaking hands. Handwriting on the back in neat script. Sisters forever. Not her handwriting. Not her mother's either. Carol's. Diane's stomach dropped. She'd packed this bag herself last night, checking twice to make sure she had everything she needed. She hadn't brought family photos. Definitely hadn't brought this photo, which lived in a shoebox at the back of her closet, along with all the other memories she tried not to look at. Her mother. Mom must have slipped it in when Diane wasn't looking, meddling, trying to get her to soften, to call Carol, to end 8 years of silence over one stupid fight about money and wills and things that seemed important at the time, but felt hollow now. Diane set the photo on the nightstand, then picked it up again. Stared at those 2 little girls who'd had no idea how badly they'd hurt each other someday. I wish you'd just disappear. The words echoed in her memory, spoken in her own voice, in her mother's kitchen on November 3rd, 1973. Screamed, actually. Diane had screamed them, while Carol cried, and their mother stood between them, trying to make peace. Carol had left that same night, packed a bag, and walked out, and they hadn't spoken since. 8 years. Diane shoved the photo back in her duffel and zipped it shut. She'd deal with it later. Or never. Never worked fine. The shower helped. Hot water and cheap motel soap, washing away sawdust and sweat, and the lingering unease from the pool. Diane stood under the spray until her fingers pruned, then stood there a bit longer. By the time she got out, dried off, and pulled on clean sweatpants and a t-shirt, night had fallen completely. She checked her watch. 8:37. The siren Frank had mentioned on her first visit should sound soon, whatever that was about. She made instant coffee and stood at the kitchenette counter drinking it, staring at nothing. Her mind kept circling back to the pool, to that reflection that shouldn't have been there, to Carol's laugh, echoing across water that hadn't moved in years. The phone on the wall was a rotary, the kind with an actual dial. Diane stared at it, soup spoon halfway to her mouth. She could call home, check on the kids, make sure Danny had done his homework and Sarah had brushed her teeth. Remind her mother to take her blood pressure medication. She could call Carol. The thought came unbidden, and she pushed it away violently. No, not after 8 years of silence. You didn't just pick up the phone and say, "Hey, sorry I told you I wished you'd disappear. How have you been?" She finished her coffee and rinsed the mug. The window above the sink looked out toward the pool area, though she couldn't see much in the darkness. Just shapes and shadows and the vague outline of the pool house against the slightly lighter sky. She was drying the bowl when she heard it. A soft knock at the window. 3 taps. Deliberate. Diane froze, hands on the dish towel. The knock came again. Same rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Branch, she thought. Just a branch blown against the glass. Except there was no wind. Diane set the bowl down and walked slowly toward the window. The curtains were open, showing nothing but darkness and her own reflection in the glass. She reached for the curtain to close it. "Diane?" The voice came from outside, muffled by glass and distance, but clear enough. A woman's voice. Carol's voice. Diane's hand stopped inches from the curtain. Her reflection stared back at her, wide-eyed and pale. "Diane, it's cold out here." Not possible. Carol was in Houston, nearly 1,000 miles away, living her own life that didn't include Diane. There was no way she could be here, standing outside Unit 4 at Ironwood Retreat in the middle of nowhere. But the voice was perfect. The exact pitch, the exact slight rasp Carol had developed after that bout of bronchitis when she was 19. "Di, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about what I said. Can we talk?" Di. Nobody called her that, except their father, who'd been dead since 1959. Carol had never used that nickname. Never. She always said Diane's full name, proper and careful, the way their mother had taught them. Diane backed away from the window, heart hammering. "I know you're angry," the voice continued, pleading now, desperate. "I deserve it, but I miss you. I miss my sister. Please, Diane, let me in. It's so cold." Diane's hand went to the window latch. All she had to do was unlock it, raise the glass, let Carol in from the cold. Sisters didn't abandon each other, even when they fought, even when they said terrible things. Blood calls to blood. Some distant part of her brain whispered. Her fingers touched the latch. Then she remembered the incident reports. All those guests hearing family members call from near the pool. Always after sunset. Always someone they were estranged from. Always voices that knew things they shouldn't know. "Carol never called me Di," Diane said quietly to the empty room. Silence outside. Then, "Diane, Diane, open the door. Open the door." Not Carol's voice anymore. Still the same pitch, but wrong somehow. Too urgent, too hungry. "Open the door. Let me in. You owe me." The words came too fast, running together, the voice changing pitch mid-sentence. Carol never spoke like that, never demanded. Always asked, always careful with her words. Diane ran to the door and slipped the deadbolt, then checked it twice to make sure it was locked. The iron horseshoe sat on the counter where she'd left it. Still unwilling
to hang the thing like some superstitious fool. Water began seeping under the door. Not creek water. Diane had seen enough standing water today to recognize the smell. Pool water. Black and stinking of algae and rot and things decomposing in the dark. The window behind her slammed against its frame, hard enough to rattle the glass. Diane spun around. Something was pressed against the window from outside, close enough that condensation was forming on the glass from its breath, or what passed for breath. The voice came again, and this time it was everywhere. Not just from the window, but from the walls, the floor, the air itself. You abandoned her. You wished her gone. Now open the door and pay your debt. The water spreading across the floor was ankle deep now, cold as ice, soaking through Diane's socks. She scrambled onto the kitchenette counter, knees banging against cabinets, watching the black water spread. The window slammed again. The glass split from the impact point, cracks racing toward the corners. Diane's eyes landed on the fireplace poker, leaning against the hearth. Iron. The work orders had mentioned iron.
The incident report stopped when iron fence posts were repaired. She lunged off the counter, feet splashing in water that tried to grab her ankles, and seized the poker. Heavy, solid, cold metal warming in her grip. The water stopped spreading. The window stopped slamming. The voice cut off mid-scream, leaving silence so complete Diane's ears rang. She stood in the middle of Unit 4, soaking wet from the knees down, gripping a fireplace poker like a weapon, breathing so hard her ribs ached. Minutes passed. 5, 10. Nothing moved. Diane didn't let go of the poker. She sat on the counter with the iron bar across her knees and stared at the door, at the window, at the water that had already started to recede, like it was being sucked back under the threshold. When she finally looked down, the water was gone, just damp stains on the carpet, already drying. But the photograph from her duffel bag sat on the floor near the door, soaking wet. The one of her and Carol at Lake Conroe. Sisters forever. Diane stared at it until the sun came up. She didn't sleep. She didn't let go of the poker. And when dawn finally broke through the curtains, painting Unit 4 in shades of gray and gold, she grabbed her truck keys and drove to the nearest payphone she could find. 7 miles to a 7-Eleven on the highway. She pulled into the parking lot at 6:45 and sat in the cab for 10 minutes, staring at the phone booth. The phone book inside was water-damaged and missing half its pages, but the H section was intact. Diane found Carol's number in the Houston listings, her sister's married name right there in black and white. Hernandez, Carol M. She'd gotten married. Diane hadn't known that. Hadn't known anything about Carol's life for 8 years. Diane's finger hovered over the dial, shaking so badly she couldn't have dialed if she'd tried. What would she even say? Hey, Carol. Sorry I told you I wished you'd disappear. Also, something wearing your face tried to drown me last night in a motel room. How's married life? The absurdity of it broke something in her chest. Diane let the phone book fall closed and walked back to her truck. She drove back to Ironwood Retreat in silence, watching the sunrise turn the hollow to bronze and pale fire, making everything look almost peaceful. Almost.
When she parked near Unit 4, Frank was waiting on her porch. He took one look at her face and said, "You didn't hang the iron." It wasn't a question.
Scene 4. Frank's warning. Diane followed Frank to the maintenance shed without a word. She was still wearing the sweatpants and t-shirt she'd thrown on after her shower last night. Her hair uncombed and probably sticking up in every direction. She probably smelled like fear sweat and stagnant water. The shed was organized in a way that made Diane's contractor heart sing. Tools hung on pegboards outlined in marker so you knew exactly where everything went. Supplies stacked in neat rows, labeled and dated. A workbench clear of clutter with a vise mounted at one end and a grinding wheel at the other. Frank pulled 2 folding chairs from a hook on the wall and set them up facing each other. He sat down with the weariness of a man who'd had this conversation before and knew it never got easier. What in the world is in that pool? Diane didn't sit. She stood with her arms crossed, every muscle in her body wound tight enough to snap. Frank looked at her for a long moment, then he said, "Sit down, please." Something in his voice made her obey. She sat, hands gripping her knees hard enough to hurt. "You saw her?" Frank asked. "Heard her?" "My sister, but it wasn't her." Diane's voice came out hoarse. It sounded exactly like her. New things only she would know. But it called me Di, and Carol never called me that. And then it started shouting and the water came under the door and she stopped, took a breath, forced herself to continue. I grabbed the fireplace poker, iron. Soon as I touched it, everything stopped. The voice, the water, all of it, just gone. Frank nodded like she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. He stood and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner, pulled out a folder thick with papers, and brought it back to his chair. It's called The Kinship. He opened the folder, revealing handwritten notes in cramped script. Been in that pool since before my father drained it. Probably before that, we don't know how long. We? The guardians. Folks who understood that some things don't stay buried, that some places are thin. My father was one. Built this whole retreat trying to contain what was already here. Diane stared at him. You're talking about ghosts, supernatural nonsense. I'm talking about something that lives in standing water. Pool. Naken Creek. Anywhere water collects and sits long enough to stagnate. It takes the shape of family you're estranged from. Siblings, parents, children. Knows everything they knew when you were still speaking. Sounds exactly like them. He pulled out a photograph from the folder. Black and white, dated 1979 on the back. A man lying face down on concrete, pool water spreading around him in a dark halo. His hand clutched a photograph. Robert Patterson, 53 years old. Found him right there by the pool in July of '79. Coroner said he drowned. Heart attack caused him to fall in the water, then he drowned in maybe 2 feet of water. Frank pulled out another photo. Susan Lee's daughter, 1976, 7 years old, found sleepwalking toward the pool at 10 at night. Took 3 adults to hold her back. She kept screaming that her mother was calling her, drowning, needed help. Her mother was standing right there, completely fine. More photos, more incident reports. A pattern emerging like a constellation coming into focus. It feeds on estrangement, Frank said quietly. On broken families, on all the things we bury and try to forget. Uses their voices, their faces, to lure you into the water. And when you go in, you drown. Even in water that shouldn't be deep enough. Found Patterson with water in his lungs and a photo of his estranged son in his hand. Found him holding that photo so tight, we had to pry his fingers open. Diane thought about the photograph on her floor this morning. Carol and her at Lake Canaro, sisters forever. Soaking wet when it should have been safe in her duffel bag. This is insane. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't. She'd heard Carol's voice. Had watched water pour under a locked door. Had seen her reflection in the pool, with a second figure beside it. "You can leave," Frank said. "Pack up your truck, go home. No one would blame you." Diane stood and walked to the shed's window. The pool sat quiet and still, reflecting the sky like dark glass. Beautiful, almost. If you didn't know what lived in it. You said it knows everything they knew when we were still speaking, but it can't know anything after the estrangement. That's right. How do you know? Frank pulled out a journal, pages yellowed with age. His father's, by the look of the handwriting. My father tested it. November 1975. He and my uncle hadn't spoken in 3 years. Some fight over inheritance. The thing in the pool used his uncle's voice, tried to lure him in. Said things only his uncle would know. But when my father asked about something that happened after they stopped talking, his uncle's grandkid being born in 1974, the thing couldn't answer. He closed the journal. It only knows what it was told when you were still family. Everything after the break is blank to it. Diane turned from the window. Your father. You said you were estranged. Frank's jaw tightened. For 5 years. I left home at 18. Said some things I shouldn't have. He said some things back. We didn't speak until a year before he died. Came back to help him build this place, try to contain what was in the pool. Did it work? For a while. Built the iron fence, blessed the posts, thought that'd be enough. Was enough, mostly. Incidents dropped to almost nothing. Then the posts started failing, one by one. Rust, age, whatever. Each time one fell, the kinship got stronger, could reach further. The perimeter was shrinking. He stood and walked to the window beside Diane, both of them staring at the pool. That's why I hired you. Pool house needs fixing, yeah, but what really needs fixing is that fence. Half the posts are down or rusted through. The wards are failing. Wards. Diane remembered the work order she'd found yesterday in the pool house. I found a work order. Wards failing. Priority urgent. June 1974. Yeah, like that. Iron holds it back. Blessed iron is even better. But the posts have to be maintained, have to stay strong. Soon as they start failing, the kinship can spread. Diane thought about the incident reports. All those people hearing voices, all of them near the pool, all of them after sunset, when the wards were at their weakest. I should leave. She said it again, but this time it felt hollow. I have kids, a mother who needs me. I can't stay here fighting some water demon or whatever this is. You could leave, Frank agreed, but it knows about you now, knows about your sister, knows about the estrangement, knows exactly how to hurt you. And the kinship doesn't always stay in the pool. Diane's blood went cold. What? It's bound here, mostly. The iron fence contains it. But marks like the one it probably left on you last night, those can follow. Not the whole creature, but echoes of it. Might show up in your bathtub at home, in puddles after rain, anywhere water sits long enough. You're saying it could follow me home, to my kids, or it could find Carol instead. Frank met her eyes. Use her voice to call to you from across the miles, drive you crazy with guilt and grief until you come back here and give it what it wants. Diane wanted to argue, to call him crazy, to walk out and drive home and forget any of this ever happened. But she couldn't, because she'd heard Carol's voice. Had felt that water try to drown her in a locked room, and the thought of her kids hearing that voice, of Sarah or Danny being lured toward standing water by something wearing their aunt's face. What do I have to do? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Frank pulled a folded paper from the folder, a blueprint, hand-drawn, showing the pool and the fence posts around its perimeter. 12 posts total, marked with numbers and dates. Repair the fence, reinforce the posts. Some need replacing completely, others just need welding and reinforcement. I've got iron stock in the shed, all the materials you need. 3 weeks should be enough if you work steady. And that'll stop it, permanently? Nothing stops it permanently, but a proper fence, properly maintained, keeps it contained, sleeping. That's the best we can do. Diane studied the blueprint, 12 posts, 3 weeks. $800 and the chance to keep her family safe from something that shouldn't exist, but absolutely did. "What about you?" she asked. "Why don't you do it?" Frank's smile was sad. "I'm not estranged from anyone anymore. Made peace with my father before he died. The kinship has no hold on me. Learned that the hard way when I tried to repair the fence myself last year. Got nothing. No voices, no visions, no attempts to lure me in. It was like I didn't exist." He folded the blueprint and handed it to her. "It needs someone who carries the same wound it feeds on. Someone with family estrangement, with guilt heavy enough to taste. Someone strong enough to face it and not break." Diane took the blueprint. Her hands were shaking. "And if I'm not strong enough? Then I pull you out of the pool like I pulled out Patterson, and I hire someone else." The brutal honesty of it was almost comforting. At least Frank wasn't trying to pretty it up, wasn't pretending this would be easy or safe or anything other than what it was. Diane looked at the blueprint again. 12 posts, 3 weeks. Keep the darkness contained. Keep her family safe. "I'm going to need more iron," she said. Frank smiled. "Shed's full of it. And Diane, this time hang the horseshoe above your door, inside, before sunset. Every single night." "Will it keep me safe?" "It'll keep you safer. A kinship can't cross a threshold with iron above it. Can't manifest inside a properly warded space. You'll still hear the voices, might still see things in reflections and windows, but it can't touch you as long as the iron holds." Diane nodded. She started to leave, then stopped. "The people who drowned, the ones in the photos, did they all die estranged?" Frank's expression went darker. "Every single one. The kinship doesn't just want to drown you. It wants you to die still carrying that broken bond. Still guilty, still grieving, still estranged. That's the real feast. The drowning is just how it takes you." Diane thought about Carol. 8 years of silence. 8 years of guilt sitting in her chest like a stone. "I wish you'd just disappear." The last words she'd said to her sister before Carol walked out. "I need to make a phone call," Diane said quietly. "Use the phone in the office. Take your time." Diane walked across the compound to the main office, the blueprint folded in her back pocket. The rotary phone sat on Frank's desk, black and solid and ordinary. She picked up the receiver, put it down, picked it up again. Carol's number was in the Houston phone book. Diane had memorized it this morning, even though she'd known she wouldn't call. But maybe Frank was right. Maybe the kinship fed on estrangement, on broken bonds left to fester. Maybe the only way to fight it was to heal the wound it was feeding on. Diane's finger touched the dial. Then she stopped. Not yet. Not like this. Not over the phone after 8 years of silence, not with her voice shaking and terror still fresh in her throat. She'd fix the fence first, contain the darkness. Prove to herself she could face it and not break. Then she'd call Carol. Then she'd find the right words to say after 8 years of saying nothing. Diane hung up the phone and walked back to the pool house. The morning sun shone bright, and if you didn't know better, you'd think this was a peaceful place. But Diane knew better now. She grabbed her tools and got to work. The fence wouldn't repair itself, and the darkness was patient. It could wait. Scene 5. Repairing the fence. The welding torch roared to life at 9 in the morning, blue flame licking at iron with a sound like controlled fury. Diane had the radio cranked up on the pool deck, AC/DC's Back in Black competing with the hiss and spark of metal joining metal. She worked methodically, replacing the first fallen fence post on the north side of the pool, the side facing Nacken Creek. Sweat soaked through her shirt despite the September cool. The torch's heat was relentless, and the work demanded absolute focus. One wrong move and she'd burn through the post entirely, or worse, burn herself. She'd seen enough contractors lose fingers to welding accidents to respect the fire. The post sank into its concrete footing with satisfying weight. Diane killed the torch and stepped back, wiping her forehead with the back of her glove. 1 down, 11 to go. She walked the perimeter, studying Frank's blueprint and comparing it to reality. The pattern was obvious once you knew to look for it. Every fallen post sat on the north side, the side facing the creek. The south-facing posts, the ones closest to the units, still stood solid. Something had been pushing from the creek side, testing the fence, finding weaknesses. Diane knelt beside the pool's edge to examine the next fallen post. The concrete footing had cracked, probably from ground shift or water erosion. She'd need to chip out the old concrete, pour fresh, let it cure overnight. Then weld the new post in place. The work would take days, maybe a week just for the north side. She was reaching for her hammer when she saw something white at the bottom of the pool. Paper. Dozens of pieces, scattered across the algae-covered basin like autumn leaves. Diane stood and walked to the equipment shed, found a pool skimmer with an extension pole, the kind used to fish out leaves and debris. She carried it back and extended it to its full length, leaning over the edge to reach the bottom. The first piece of paper came up dripping black water, disintegrating at the edges. A photograph. Water damaged, the image barely visible, but Diane could make out 2 figures. A man and a boy, maybe. Someone had written on the back in ink that had run until it was illegible. She fished out another photograph. This one showed 2 women, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling at the camera. The back read, Patricia and Jennifer, sisters, 1977. Another, John and Michael, father-son, 1979. Another, Robert and Elizabeth, husband-wife, 1976. Diane pulled up photograph after photograph, laying them on the concrete to dry in the sun. Dozens of them, all family photos, all with names and relationships written on the back, all water-damaged beyond recognition, all estranged. She could feel it in the captions, the way the dates were written, the careful notation of relationships that needed clarifying, because the people in the photos no longer spoke. The kinship collected them, kept them at the bottom of the pool like trophies. Diane's stomach turned. How many people had this thing killed? How many families had it torn apart? She was crouched by the pool's edge, examining the last photograph. When the water moved, not ripples, the whole surface shifted, like something massive had rolled over just beneath. Black water sloshing against the sides, leaves and debris swirling in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Diane scrambled backward, dropping the skimmer. A whisper drifted up from the water. Too soft to make out words, but the cadence was familiar. Female. Young. Carol's voice. No, Diane said aloud. She grabbed the welding torch and fired it up, holding the blue flame between herself and the pool like a weapon. You don't get to do this during the day. That's not how this works. The water went still. Then it spoke. You wished her gone, Diane. The voice was clearer now. Carol's voice, not muffled, not distant. Right there, like her sister was standing at the pool's edge. November 3rd, 1973. The kitchen. You screamed it. I wish you'd just disappear. You remember? Diane's hands tightened on the torch. She did remember. Remembered the fight about their mother's will, about Carol accusing her of manipulation, about Diane losing her temper, and saying words that had echoed in her head for 8 years. She cried for 3 days after, the voice continued, soft and sad, and absolutely Carol. Did you know that? She called Mom, crying so hard she could barely breathe, kept asking why you hated her, why you wanted her gone. Shut up, Diane's voice shook. You're not her. The water began to rise, not overflow exactly. More like it was growing, expanding, the surface lifting without stilling over the edge, a shape forming in the center. Arms, torso, head. Carol's face, made of pool water and algae and rot, eyes hollow and black, mouth open, reaching. You abandoned me. Diane swung the torch toward the figure. The flame cut through the water, Carol's shoulder, and the thing shrieked. The water collapsed back into the pool with a splash that soaked Diane's boots. Steam rose where the torch had touched. Diane stood there, breathing hard, the torch still roaring in her grip. The pool sat quiet again, just stagnant water, reflecting the sky. But she could feel it watching, waiting. She killed the torch and checked her watch. 2:15, still hours until sunset. The kinship shouldn't be this strong during daylight, shouldn't be able to manifest, to speak, to form shapes. Unless the fence was worse than Frank had let on. Unless the wards were failing faster than anyone realized. Diane looked at the fallen posts on the north side. 8 of them down. 8 gaps in the fence where the darkness could seep through. She had to work faster. She fired up the torch again and went back to work, welding posts with hands that shook slightly but held steady enough. The radio played on. Journey now. Something about holding on to that feeling. Diane didn't sing along. At 4:30, she was securing the last post on the north side when she noticed the algae. The patterns on the pool's surface had changed. What had been random swirls and whirls this morning now formed something almost deliberate. Lines and curves that looked like letters if you squinted. Diane didn't squint. She kept working, kept her eyes on the iron and the weld and the bright arc of the flame. But she could see it in her peripheral vision. Words forming in the algae. Blood calls to blood. The torch slipped. Diane jerked it back just in time, the flame missing her leg by inches. She killed it and stood, breathing hard, staring at the pool. The algae shifted, letters rearranging. Abandon her again, then drown in guilt. I'm not abandoning her, Diane said to the empty pool deck. I'm fixing the fence. I'm containing you. And when I'm done, I'm calling my sister and making this right. The water surged, not rising, but moving, churning, like something thrashing beneath the surface. The algae words dissolved into chaos. Diane grabbed her tools and backed away. The sun was sinking toward the tree line, painting everything in shades of rust and honey. Maybe an hour until sunset. Time to go. She loaded her welding equipment into the truck bed, hands moving on autopilot. 4 posts repaired today. Good progress. Another week and the north side would be done. The fence whole again. If the kinship let her finish. Diane was coiling the last extension cord when the smell hit her. Sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. She turned. The pool was overflowing. Not a lot, just a thin sheet of black water, spreading across the concrete, moving toward her in a slow, deliberate tide. Daylight. It was still daylight. This shouldn't be possible. Diane threw the cord in the truck and climbed in, slamming the door. Through the windshield, she watched the water spread, reaching for where she'd been standing seconds ago. It touched her toolbox, recoiled. The metal was iron, must have been enough to stop it. But the water kept spreading in every other direction, flowing around the iron like a stream around a stone. Diane started the engine and drove to Unit 4, watching in the rear-view mirror as the water finally stopped spreading. Just sat there on the concrete, a dark stain marking how close it had come. Inside Unit 4, she locked the door and checked the horseshoe above the frame. Still there, still secure. She'd hung it last night after Frank's warning, and whatever protection it offered had kept her safe. So far. Diane made coffee and stood at the window, staring at the pool. The water had receded back to normal levels. No evidence of the overflow, except for dark stains on the concrete. In the reflection of the window glass, she could see her room behind her. Empty, normal. Then a second reflection appeared beside hers. Carol, younger than she should be, wearing that blue sweater, standing right behind Diane's left shoulder. Diane spun around. Nothing there. Just her empty unit. She looked back at the window. The reflection was gone. Her coffee tasted like creek water. Diane poured it down the sink and sat at the small table, hands shaking. 1 week of work, and the kinship was already getting stronger. testing her during daylight, manifesting in reflections. What would happen when she finished the fence? When the wards were whole again? Would it fight back? Diane pulled out the blueprint and studied it, forcing her mind to focus on concrete problems. Posts, concrete, welds, things she could control. She didn't think about Carol. She didn't think about the water spreading across concrete in daylight. She didn't think about what would happen when the sun set in 20 minutes. Instead, she checked the horseshoe one more time, made sure every window was locked, and sat in the chair, facing the door, with the fireplace poker across her lap. Outside, the siren sounded, 8:47 exactly, and in the gathering darkness, something began to laugh. Scene 6. The chase begins. Wednesday morning, Diane woke to find wet footprints leading from her door to the bed. Small, barefoot, trailing pool water across the carpet, in a path that ended right beside where she'd slept. She hadn't heard a thing. The horseshoe still hung above the door. The locks were still secure. But something had been in her room while she slept, standing beside her bed, dripping water that smelled of rot and algae. Diane was in her truck and driving by 6:30, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. She didn't stop at the pool house, drove straight to the 7-Eleven 7 miles out, and sat in the parking lot, engine running, trying to convince herself to turn around and go home. Danny needed cleats. Sarah needed a coat. Mom needed the furnace fixed. And Carol needed a sister who wasn't too proud to apologize. Diane put the truck in reverse, then shifted back to park. She couldn't leave. Not yet. Because Frank was right. The kinship knew about her now, knew about Carol. And if Diane left without finishing the fence, it would follow, would find Carol, would use her voice to call across the miles until Diane came back, or until it got what it wanted. The only way forward was through. Diane bought coffee that tasted like burnt rubber and drove back to Ironwood Retreat. By 9, she was working again, chipping out cracked concrete from the next post footing. By 10, she had fresh concrete mixed and poured. By 11, she was positioning the new iron post, checking it with a level, making sure it was perfectly vertical. By noon, she realized she was being watched. The feeling started as an itch between her shoulder blades, the sense of eyes on her back. Diane turned twice, looking around the pool deck, but saw nothing. Just trees and sky, and the pool sitting quiet. The third time she turned, she saw it. A figure in the water. Not floating on the surface, but beneath it, maybe 2 feet down, Carol's face staring up through the algae. Not moving, just watching. Diane forced herself to turn back to the post, welded it in place with hands that wanted to shake, but didn't, because she'd learned a long time ago that fear on a job site got you hurt. The torch flame was bright enough that she couldn't see anything else. Just the weld, the iron, the bright arc where metal met metal. When she killed the torch and stepped back, the figure in the water was gone. Diane checked her watch. 12:45. 5 posts down, 7 to go. She was making good time. Too good, maybe. Like something wanted her to finish. She took a lunch break, sitting on the pool house steps with a sandwich she couldn't taste.
The photographs she'd pulled from the pool sat in a pile nearby, drying in the sun.
Diane picked one up. The image had cleared slightly as it dried. Two women, maybe in their 30s, standing in front of a house. Sisters, by the look of them. Same nose, same smile. Patricia and Jennifer, sisters, 1977. 4 years ago. Had they reconciled before one of them drowned? Or had they died estranged, the kinship feasting on that broken bond? Diane set the photo down and unwrapped the second half of her sandwich, took one bite and put it away. Her appetite had died sometime around finding wet footprints beside her bed. At 1:30, she was back to work, mixing more concrete for the next footing. The radio played Foreigner, something about waiting for a girl like her. Diane hummed along without thinking, focused on the consistency of the concrete, the proportions of water to mix. That's when the voices started. Soft at first, barely audible over the radio. A woman's voice, young, calling from somewhere near the pool. "Diane? Diane, where are you?" Carol's voice. Diane kept mixing concrete. Didn't look up. Didn't acknowledge it. "Diane, I'm lost. I can't find my way back. Help me." The voice was closer now, right behind her. Diane's shoulders tensed, but she kept working, kept her hands moving, kept her eyes on the concrete. "Why won't you help me? Why won't you look at me?" Another voice joined the first. Older, familiar, their mother. "Diane, your sister needs you. Stop this foolishness and help her." Diane's hands stilled. She closed her eyes, took a breath. Not real. None of it was real. Her mother was alive and well in Houston, probably watching her stories on TV and complaining about the heat. "Diane Marie Matthews, you look at me when I'm talking to you." Her mother's voice. The exact tone she'd used when Diane and Carol were kids fighting in the back seat. That particular edge of exasperation mixed with love. Diane opened her eyes and went back to mixing concrete. A third voice, small, young, terrified. "Mommy? Mommy? Where are you? I'm scared." "Sarah." Diane's head snapped up. Her daughter's voice, crying, calling for her from somewhere near the pool. "Mommy? It's dark, and I can't find you, and there's water everywhere." "No." Diane stood, dropping the mixing stick. "No, you don't get to use her voice. Sarah's at home. She's safe." The crying got louder, more desperate. "Mommy, please. It's so cold. The water's rising." Diane grabbed the welding torch and fired it up, turning toward the pool. The flame roared between her and the water. "She's not here. You can't have her." The voices stopped. Then the pool erupted. Water exploded upward in a fountain, black and frothing, reaching 15 feet into the air. Shapes formed in the spray. Carol, their mother, Sarah, all made of water and reaching, mouths open, screaming silent accusations. The fountain collapsed, back into the pool, with a crash that sent waves sloshing over the sides. Water spread across the concrete in dark fingers, moving fast, searching. Diane backed toward the truck, checked her watch. 3:45. Still hours until sunset. This shouldn't be happening in daylight. The water found gaps in the fence, the places where posts were still missing. Poured through like it was being forced under pressure, spreading wider, moving toward Diane. She ran to her truck, threw the torch in the bed, climbed in. The water was 3 feet from her tires when she started the engine. In the rearview mirror, she saw it clearly now. The water wasn't spreading randomly. It was chasing her, following her truck as she backed up, reaching like grasping hands. It stopped at the edge of the parking lot. Just stopped, like it had hit an invisible wall. The water sat there, black and still, marking the boundary of how far it could reach. Diane drove to Unit 4 and locked herself inside. 2 hours until sunset. 2 hours to decide if she was going to finish this job or run. She made coffee, drank it at the window, watching the pool. The water had receded again. No evidence of the chase, except for dark stains on the concrete that might have been shadows. The phone on the wall seemed to stare at her. Carol's number was in Houston information. 1 phone call. That's all it would take. But what would she say? Sorry, I wished you'd disappear. But also, there's a water demon using your voice to try to drown me? So I thought I'd check in? No, she needed to finish the fence first. Prove to herself she could face this thing and not break. Then she'd call Carol. Then she'd find the right words. Diane sat at the table and forced herself to eat the sandwich she'd abandoned at lunch. It tasted like sawdust and fear, but she ate it anyway. Needed the energy. Needed to stay strong. At 5:30, she made a decision. Grabbed her tool belt and the welding torch and headed back to the pool. 1 more post, just 1 more before sunset. 4 down, 8 to go. She could do 1 more. The pool sat quiet as she approached. That black water reflecting the late afternoon sky in shades of rust and gold. Beautiful. Almost, if you didn't know what lived beneath. Diane positioned the next post and fired up the torch. The weld took 20 minutes. Careful work that demanded all her focus. When she finished, the post stood solid and true, iron gleaming in the fading light. 5 down, 7 to go. She killed the torch and stepped back, wiping sweat from her forehead. Checked her watch. 6:55. Sunset in 20 minutes. She needed to pack up, get inside, be safe behind iron and locked doors before the darkness came fully alive. Diane was coiling her extension cord when she heard it. Water. Sloshing. Moving. She turned slowly. The pool was draining. Not through some pipe or drain. The water was flowing up and over the sides, pouring onto the concrete in sheets. Gallons of it. Hundreds of gallons, maybe. All of it flowing in one direction, toward the gap in the fence, the place where 4 posts were still missing. The water poured through like a river finding a break in a dam, spreading out on the other side, moving toward the woods, toward Naked Creek, toward freedom. No. Diane grabbed the iron post she planned to install tomorrow. Heavy, unwieldy, but it was iron, and she needed to block that gap. She ran toward the fence, dragging the post. The water was ankle-deep now, freezing cold, grabbing at her boots. Shapes moved through it. Hands, faces. Carol's voice screaming from everywhere at once. "You can't stop us." Diane reached the gap and jammed the post into the ground. It wasn't secured, wasn't welded, just iron touching earth. But it was something. A barrier. The water hit it and recoiled with a sound like screaming. Then it found another gap, 20 feet down, where 2 posts had fallen. The water poured through faster now, a torrent, and Diane couldn't reach it in time. She tried, running through water that grabbed at her ankles, but she wasn't fast enough. The water reached the woods, touched the trees, spread out into the shadows beneath the branches, and something answered. From Nakin Creek, a sound like breathing. Deep, wet, wrong. The pool water that had escaped into the woods began to flow back. Not retreating, merging, joining with something larger. Diane stood at the fence line, breathing hard, and watched as the kinship found the creek. The breathing got louder, closer. Diane ran, made it to Unit 4 with minutes to spare before sunset. Slammed the door. Locked it. Checked the horseshoe. Outside, the siren sounded. 8:47. And from the woods, from the creek, from the pool and the darkness gathering between, something began to hunt. The chase had only just begun.
Scene 7. Trapped in the office. Diane made it halfway to Unit 4 before she realized she'd left the welding torch at the pool. $800 worth of equipment sitting beside the fence where she dropped it in her panic. She couldn't afford to replace it, couldn't afford to lose a single tool when she was barely making rent, as it was. She stood in the parking lot, truck keys in hand, looking back toward the pool house. The sun had just touched the horizon, painting everything in shades of blood and copper. Maybe 10 minutes of good light left, 10 minutes to run back, grab the torch, and get to safety. Or she could leave it, come back in the morning, accept the loss if it wasn't there. Diane thought about Danny's cleats, Sarah's winter coat, the furnace making that grinding sound. She ran back toward the pool. The torch sat exactly where she'd left it, beside the fence post she'd jammed into the gap. In the fading light, she could see the water had receded back into the pool, leaving dark stains on the concrete like accusation. Diane grabbed the torch and turned to run. The pool erupted, not exploding upward this time, pouring over the sides in sheets, gallons of black water flooding across the concrete in every direction. Moving with purpose, spreading fast. Diane ran toward the parking lot, toward Unit 4 in safety and iron horseshoes above locked doors. The water cut her off. It poured across the path between her and the units, a river 3 feet deep and rising, moving faster than water should be able to move. She could see shapes in it, hands reaching, faces pressing up from beneath, mouths open and mouths, her truck's silent screams. 20 feet to her left. She pivoted, running for it. The water reached it first, surrounded the vehicle in a black moat, rising to the door handles, lapping at the windows. Too deep to wade through. Too alive to risk. Diane spun around, searching for any escape route. The water was everywhere now, flooding the parking lot, spreading toward the tree line, cutting off every path to safety. Except one. The pool house sat behind her. Dark. Waiting. But the office, the small corner office with the filing cabinet and desk, had its own door. Had an iron horseshoe above the threshold. Frank's father had put iron protection on every door in this compound. The water was moving toward her in a wave now, 3 feet high and building. This was what it wanted. She could feel it, the intelligence behind the flood. The kinship was hurting her, cutting off escape, forcing her into the one place it could trap her all night. But trapped in a room with iron protection was better than drowning in open ground. Diane ran for the pool house. The main door stood open, the larger room dark but empty of water. She crashed through it, the welding torch still in her grip, and looked for the office door. There, corner of the room, door standing ajar. She could see the desk through the opening, the filing cabinet, the small window. Behind her, the water hit the pool house entrance like a breaking dam, pouring through the doorway, flooding the main room in seconds, black and freezing and full of reaching hands. Diane lunged for the office door, threw herself inside, slammed it shut. Her hands found the deadbolt and twisted, locked. The office was small, maybe 10 by 12, a desk, a filing cabinet, one window, and the door she'd just locked. An iron horseshoe hung above the frame, old and pitted with rust. Thank God for Frank and his superstitions. Diane leaned against the door, breathing hard, listening. Silence, then water, the sound of it sloshing, moving, coming closer. She looked at the window. Water pressed against the glass from outside. Black pool water, thick with algae, forming a wall that blocked out the last of the sunset. She could see shapes moving through it, faces, hands pressing against the glass like aquarium fish. The door shuttered behind her. Diane jumped away from it. Water began seeping under the threshold. Just a thin trickle at first, but growing. The iron horseshoe above the door flickered faintly, or maybe that was just the light. Either way, it was holding, barely. Diane backed to the center of the room, torch still in her hands. The water spread across the floor, black and freezing, moving with purpose, searching. From outside came voices, dozens of them. All the people who'd drowned in that pool, all the estranged families, all the broken bonds crying out at once. And above them all, clear and terrible, Carol's voice. Diane. Dee, let me in. You're not her, Diane said to the empty office. Her voice shook. I'm cold, Di. So cold. The water's so deep and I can't swim anymore and you're not helping. Why won't you help me? The window cracked, a thin fracture running from corner to corner. I called you. 3 times I called after I left. You never answered. You let me drown in silence. That wasn't true. Carol had never called, had she? Diane's memory felt slippery. The fight had been so loud, so ugly. Had there been calls after? Had Carol tried to reach out after? Knocked on her door and Diane hadn't answered? Called the house and Diane had hung up when she heard her voice? You wished me gone, the voice continued. Softer now, sad. November 3rd, 1973. In Mom's kitchen. You screamed it. I wish you'd just disappear. And I did, Dee. I disappeared, and you never came looking. The water was ankle deep now. Diane climbed onto the desk, boots squelching. The torch was useless without fuel, but she held it anyway. Iron. It was iron. I'm sorry. The words came out before she could stop them. Carol, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I was angry and stupid, and I said something I can't take back. The water stopped rising. Then open the door. Let me in. We can talk. We can fix this. Diane looked at the door. Water pooled beneath it, dark and waiting. The iron horseshoe flickered again, definitely flickering now, like a light bulb about to die. Tell me something, Diane said, voice steadier now. Tell me something that happened during 1973. Silence. You can't, can you? Because you're not Carol. You're just wearing her shape, using her voice. But you don't know anything that happened after we stopped talking. The voices outside grew louder, angry now, furious. Blood calls to blood. You owe her. You owe us. The window exploded inward. Glass and water poured into the office in a wave. Diane scrambled onto the filing cabinet as the desk disappeared beneath black water. The torch fell from her hands, swallowed by the flood. The water was chest-deep in seconds, rising fast, too fast. Diane grabbed onto the top of the filing cabinet, pulling herself up. The metal was cold and slippery, but it was iron, and the water couldn't quite touch it. Recoiled from it, like it had from the fence posts. From the water below, Carol's face emerged. Not quite solid, made of pool water and rot, but recognizable. Her sister's face, twisted with grief and rage. You left me to drown in guilt, and now you'll drown in truth. More faces rose around Carol's. The other victims, all of them reaching, all of them screaming, all of them demanding payment for broken bonds and unspoken apologies. Diane clung to the filing cabinet, water lapping at her boots. The ceiling was 8 feet high. The water was at 6 feet and climbing. She was going to drown in this office, just like all the others, found face down with water in her lungs and a photograph in her hand. No. Diane let go of the cabinet with one hand and grabbed at the filing cabinet drawer. It was underwater now, but she wrenched it open. Frank's father's journal had to be in here, the one with the binding ritual, the one that explained how to fight this thing. Her hand closed on leather. She pulled out the journal, water streaming from its pages. The entries were barely legible, ink running, but she could make out enough. November 18th, 1975. The kinship knows everything the estranged family member knows. Shared memories, private conversations, secrets never told to anyone else. Only way to identify it, ask about something that happened after the estrangement. It can't know what it never witnessed. Diane had already tested that. The thing wearing Carol's face couldn't answer questions about Sarah's middle name change, about anything that happened after 1973. She flipped pages frantically, searching for more. The water was at her waist now, the filing cabinet top barely keeping her above the surface. December 3rd, 1975. The kinship feeds on estrangement, but it doesn't just want drowning. It wants you to die estranged, to never reconcile. That's the real feast. The drowning is just how it takes you. If you reconcile before it can claim you, it loses its hold. Reconcile. Make peace. Peace. Heal the wound. But Carol wasn't here. Diane couldn't reconcile with a water demon wearing her sister's face. Another page, half dissolved, but the words were clear enough. January 10th, 1976. Tried speaking truth to the kinship. Full confession of my own estrangement with David. Spoke every word of anger, every moment of pride, every reason we'd fought. The kinship fed on it like honey. But then I spoke forgiveness. Forgave myself, forgave him, meant it, truly meant it. The kinship shrieked, retreated, cannot feed on healed bonds, cannot touch peace. Forgiveness. The water was at Diane's chest now. The filing cabinet was sinking, the weight of the flood pushing it down. She had maybe 30 seconds before she went under. Diane closed her eyes, thought about Carol. Not the water thing below, but the real Carol. Her sister. The girl who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd held her hand at their father's funeral, who'd shared secrets and clothes and dreams. The sister she'd hurt. I'm sorry, Diane said clearly, speaking to the memory, not the monster. Carol, I'm so sorry. I said terrible things. I was angry about the will, about Mom playing favorites, about feeling like I wasn't enough, and I took it out on you. I wished you'd disappear because I couldn't face how much I'd failed us both. The water slowed its rise, just slightly, but enough to notice. You didn't deserve that. You deserved a sister who could admit when she was wrong, who could say I'm sorry instead of letting pride poison everything. Diane opened her eyes. The water Carol hovered inches away, face shifting, uncertain. I can't change what I said, can't take back those words. But I can forgive myself for saying them, and I can forgive you for leaving. You had every right to leave. I gave you every reason. The water began to recede, and I can promise that when I get out of here, I'm calling you, the real you. And I'm saying all of this again, because you deserve to hear it, because we deserve better than 8 years of silence. Diane pulled in a breath, filling her lungs with truth. I forgive us both, for the fight, for the silence, for being human and flawed and too stubborn to pick up the phone. I forgive us. The water Carol's face twisted, mouth opening in a silent scream. Then it collapsed, dissolving into ordinary water that rushed toward the broken window like a drain had opened. The flood receded in seconds, pouring out through the shattered glass, leaving the office soaked but empty. The filing cabinet settled with a groan. Diane climbed down on shaking legs. The journal lay on the desk, waterlogged but intact. She picked it up, water streaming from the pages. Cannot feed on healed bonds, cannot touch peace. Outside, the siren cut through the silence, not the evening warning. A different sound, 3 short bursts, all clear. Diane walked to the broken window and looked out. The pool sat quiet under the stars, water level back to normal. No shapes, no voices, just standing water reflecting the night sky. She'd survived. The office door opened easily now, the deadbolt no longer stuck. Diane stepped out into the cool night air, still holding the journal, her clothes soaked through. Frank stood in the parking lot, flashlight in hand. He walked toward her slowly, studying her face. "You spoke forgiveness," he said. "Not a question. I spoke truth. Same thing, I guess." Frank nodded. "Most people can't. They drown still hating, still guilty. You did what my father couldn't teach anyone else to do." Diane looked back at the pool. "It's not over, though, is it? The fence still has gaps. The wards are still failing." "No, it's not over, but you proved you can face it and survive. That's more than most." Diane walked toward Unit 4, her boots squelching. She needed dry clothes, hot coffee, maybe a stiff drink if Frank had any lying around. But first, she needed to use the phone. Carol's number was in Houston Information. One phone call. That's all it would take. This time, Diane was ready to make it. Morning could wait. The living couldn't. Scene 8. The Gauntlet. Diane made it 3 steps from the pool house before she realized her mistake. She'd survived the siege, spoken forgiveness, broken the kinship's hold on her guilt, but she'd done it at midnight, in the darkest part of night, with 50 feet of open ground between the pool house and the safety of Unit 4. And the kinship was still out there. Wounded, maybe, weakened by her words, but not gone. The first hint came as a sound. Water, sloshing, moving behind her. Diane turned. The pool was overflowing again. Not exploding, not rushing. Just rising, spilling over the edges in a slow, deliberate flood. Water spreading across the concrete toward her in a dark tide. Frank was gone. She'd seen him in the parking lot just moments ago, but now the compound sat empty. Just Diane and the darkness and the water spreading toward her like reaching fingers. Unit 4's porch light glowed 50 feet away. Warm and safe and so far. Diane ran. The water found her before she'd covered 10 feet. Not attacking exactly, just flowing around her boots, ankle deep and freezing, moving with her like it was hurting her somewhere. Shapes rose in the water, hands made of black pool water and algae, reaching for her ankles, her calves, trying to pull her down. Diane kicked through them. The hands dissolved and reformed, persistent and patient. 20 feet. The water was knee-deep now, rising faster than should be possible. Diane's boots filled with cold that burned like fire. Her jeans soaked through, heavy and dragging. A voice rose from the water. Not Carol this time. Their mother. "Diane, stop running. You can't outrun family. Blood calls to blood." Diane didn't answer. Couldn't spare the breath. She pushed forward, each step harder than the last, water grabbing at her like quicksand. 30 feet. The water was waist deep. Diane could see Unit 4's door now. The porch light illuminating the threshold. So close. If she could just reach it. Something wrapped around her ankle. Solid. Strong. Pulling. Diane went down. Water closed over her head. Black and freezing and alive with movement. Hands grabbed her arms, her hair, her clothes. Pulling her deeper even though the water couldn't be more than 3 feet deep. But depth was meaningless here. The kinship could drown you in inches if it wanted. Diane thrashed, fighting, kicking. Her hand found her tool belt, still strapped around her waist. Iron tools, iron hammer. She pulled the hammer free and swung it blind. The water around her shrieked. The hands released. Diane broke the surface, gasping, coughing up water that tasted of rot and ancient things. She was 10 feet from where she'd fallen. The current had dragged her away from Unit 4 toward the pool. No, she wasn't going that way. Wasn't letting this thing pull her back to where it was strongest. Diane turned and fought against the current. The water resisted, thick as syrup, pulling at her with purpose. She swung the hammer again, clearing a path. The iron cutting through the kinship's manifestation like a knife through smoke. 40 feet. She could see the porch steps now. 3 steps up to safety. The water surged. A wave that shouldn't exist in standing water crashed over her. Diane went under again, tumbling, disoriented. Which way was up? Where was the air? Her shoulder hit something hard. The pool house wall. The current had spun her around, pushed her in the wrong direction. Diane's lungs burned. She needed air, needed to surface. But the water pressed down on her, holding her under, patient as stone. She still had the hammer. Diane braced her feet against the pool house wall and swung the hammer up, toward what she hoped was the surface, toward the air she desperately needed. The hammer broke through. Diane followed it, pulling herself up with strength born of pure terror. Her head cleared the water and she dragged in a breath that burned like swallowing fire. Unit 4 sat to her left now, 15 feet away. The current had pushed her off course, but she could still make it. A shape rose from the water in front of her. Not hands this time. A full figure. Carol, solid, physical. Wearing that blue sweater and worn jeans, hair dripping black water, eyes hollow voids that swallowed light. "You can't leave," the Carol thing said. Its voice was wrong. Too many voices layered over each other, Carol and their mother and all the other victims speaking as one. "You owe us. You abandoned her. Now you pay the debt." "I already paid." Diane's voice came out hoarse from coughing up water. "I spoke forgiveness. I meant it. You can't hold me anymore." The Carol thing tilted its head. "Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, doesn't undo the words. You still wished her gone, still wanted her to disappear, and now—" It smiled. Black water poured from its mouth. "Now she has." The thing lunged. Diane swung the hammer. It connected with the Carol thing's chest, and the figure exploded into spray. Water everywhere, raining down, soaking Diane even more thoroughly than before. But it had bought her seconds, maybe 5, maybe 10. She ran. Not toward Unit 4, toward the truck. It sat in the parking lot, maybe 20 feet from where the water ended. If she could just reach it, climb in, lock the doors. The water chased her. Diane could hear it, a roar like rapids, impossible in standing water, but happening anyway. Crashing behind her, reaching for her boots. 10 feet from the truck. 5. 3. Her hand closed on the door handle. Locked. No, she'd left it unlocked. Always left it unlocked on job sites. Except she'd locked it after the water had spread during her afternoon work. Had locked it and taken the keys with her when she'd run back for the welding torch. The keys were in her pocket, in her soaked jeans. Diane fumbled for them, fingers numb with cold, while the water rose around her calves. Found them. Dropped them. They fell into the water at her feet. Diane plunged her hand into the black water, searching, praying. Her fingers closed on metal. She pulled out the keys, shaking so hard she could barely hold them, jammed the key in the lock, turned it. The door opened. She threw herself inside and slammed the door. The water hit the truck a second later, rocking it on its springs, trying to force its way through the seals. But trucks were sealed tight. The water couldn't get in. Diane sat in the driver's seat, dripping, shaking, watching water flow around the truck like a river around a stone. The iron in the truck's frame was keeping her safe, just barely, but safe. Unit 4 sat across the parking lot, 20 feet away. The porch light glowed, a promise of real safety if she could just reach it. The water began to recede, slowly, reluctantly, flowing back toward the pool like it was being called home. Diane watched it go, her hand still on the door handle, not daring to move until every drop had disappeared. When the parking lot was finally clear, showing just damp asphalt in the porch light, she opened the truck door and ran. Made it to Unit 4 in 10 seconds flat, threw herself through the door, slammed it, through every lock. She looked up. The iron horseshoe hung above the frame on the inside, solid and secure, safe. Diane collapsed on the floor, back against the door, breathing hard. She'd made it. Through the office siege, through the gauntlet, through water that wanted nothing more than to pull her down and drown her in guilt. She was alive. Her clothes were soaked through. Her boots squelched when she moved. Her tool belt had survived, the iron tools intact. The hammer that had saved her life sat on the floor beside her, dripping black water onto the carpet. Diane stripped off her wet clothes in the bathroom, hanging them over the shower rod to dry. She pulled on dry sweatpants and a t-shirt, then made coffee with shaking hands. 3:30 in the morning. Too late to call Carol. Too early to go back to work. Diane sat at the table, wrapped in a blanket, drinking coffee that didn't warm her. Outside the compound sat quiet. The pool had returned to its normal level. No voices, no shapes, just standing water reflecting the stars. But it wasn't over. The fence still had gaps, 7 posts still missing. Until those gaps were closed, until the wards were complete, the kinship would keep testing, keep trying to find a way through her defenses. Forgiveness had weakened it, but completion would bind it. Diane pulled out the blueprint and studied it by lamplight. 7 more posts. A week of work, maybe more if she took the time to do it right. Proper concrete footings, proper welds, proper blessing if she could figure out how to do that. Frank would know. Frank's father had blessed the posts in 1974. There had to be notes somewhere, instructions, something that explained how to make the iron hold. She'd ask him in the morning, get the last pieces of the puzzle, and then she'd finish this job, seal the gaps, complete the wards, put the kinship back to sleep. Diane drank her coffee and watched the sun rise through the window, the hollow turning a rosy gold. The pool sat quiet in the morning light, looking almost peaceful. Almost. But Diane knew better now. Knew what lived in that black water. Knew what it could do. And she knew she was going to finish what Frank's father had started. Not because she needed the money anymore, but because some things needed to be contained. Some darkness needed to be held back, and someone had to stand watch. Even if it was just a contractor from Houston who'd come here to fix a pool house and ended up fighting something much older than concrete and iron. Diane finished her coffee as the sun climbed higher. Then she grabbed her tools and went back to work. The fence wouldn't repair itself, and the kinship was waiting. Scene 9. Frank's confession. Frank was waiting for her at the pool house when she arrived at 8 in the morning. Diane had slept maybe an hour, fitful and filled with dreams of drowning. She'd given up at 7 and showered, scrubbing pool water out of her hair until the hot water ran cold. Her clothes from last night hung over the shower rod, still damp, smelling of algae and rot. She'd probably have to throw them out. Small price for surviving. Frank sat on the pool house steps with 2 cups of coffee, steam rising in the cool morning air. He handed one to Diane as she approached. "You made it through. Not a question. Barely." Diane took the coffee and sat beside him. Her muscles ached like she'd been hit by a truck. "I spoke forgiveness like your father's journal said. It worked, mostly. Mostly, the kinship didn't like it. Chased me from the pool house to my truck. I had to run through 3 feet of water that wanted to drown me." Diane sipped the coffee. It was strong and bitter and exactly what she needed. "But I made it." The iron held. Frank nodded slowly, staring at the pool. The water sat quiet this morning, reflecting the sky like dark glass. No movement, no shapes, just standing water doing what standing water did. "My father tried to speak forgiveness once, November 1975. He and my uncle had been estranged for years to fight over land inheritance after my grandfather died. Stupid fight. The kind that tears families apart over things that don't matter." Frank paused, both hands wrapped around his coffee cup. He came out here one night, stood by this pool, and spoke every word he'd been carrying. Told the water about the fight, about the anger, about how much he missed his brother. Then he said he forgave himself. Forgave my uncle. Meant it. What happened? The kinship shrieked. My father described it as every voice it had ever collected screaming at once. Said the water boiled. Said shapes rose and dissolved and reformed, trying to find something to grab onto, but it couldn't touch him anymore. The forgiveness broke its hold. Diane thought about last night. The Carol thing exploding into spray when she'd swung the hammer. The way the water had chased her but couldn't quite catch her, like it was weaker than before. So I weakened it, but I didn't stop it. You can't stop it. Not completely. Frank set his coffee down and pulled something from his jacket pocket. A photograph, old and faded, showing 2 men standing beside the pool. One was older, maybe 60, weathered and strong. The other was younger, maybe 30, with Frank's eyes. My father and me. 1976, year after he spoke forgiveness to the kinship. Frank tapped the older man's face. He thought he'd won, thought the creature was bound permanently, went back to normal life, thought the danger was over. But it wasn't. No. The kinship feeds on estrangement, on broken families, and my father made a mistake. He spoke forgiveness, but he never actually reconciled with my uncle, never picked up the phone, never wrote a letter. The wound was still there, just covered over with good intentions. Frank's jaw tightened. 2 years later, my uncle died. Heart attack. They found him at home, life alone, holding a photograph of my father. They'd never spoken after that land fight, never made peace, and my father had to live with knowing he'd had the words but never used them. Diane felt cold despite the coffee. The kinship came back, stronger than before, because now it wasn't just feeding on estrangement, it was feeding on regret. on the guilt of reconciliation that came too late. Frank put the photograph away. My father died in 1978. Heart attack, same as his brother. Found him right here by the pool, checking the fence line. He was holding this. He pulled out another photograph. A young Frank, maybe 18, standing beside a car with a suitcase, leaving home. We'd fought the day I left. Terrible fight about me not taking over the family business, about me abandoning my responsibilities. I said things I couldn't take back. He said things that cut deep, and then I left. Didn't speak to him for 5 years. But you came back. Year before he died, yeah. Helped him build this place. Thought we'd reconciled, but we never actually talked about the fight. Never said the words. Just worked side by side in silence and pretended the past didn't matter. Frank's voice went quiet. The kinship knew, it always knows. It found him out here one night, used my voice, my shape, tried to lure him into the water. He was strong enough to refuse. But the strain, the guilt, the weight of carrying that broken bond even after we'd supposedly fixed it. His heart gave out. Diane stared at the pool. You think the kinship killed him? I think it fed on him until there was nothing left to feed on. The heart attack was just his body giving up the fight. They sat in silence for a long moment. Birds called from the trees. Somewhere in the distance, Nakin Creek whispered over rocks. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds, at odds with everything this place really was. Why did you hire me? Diane asked. Really? Frank looked at her. Because you're estranged from family. Because you carry the same wound the kinship feeds on. And because the binding works best when the person doing it understands what they're fighting. You used me as bait. I gave you a weapon, the knowledge, the iron, the truth about what forgiveness really means. Frank stood, brushing off his jeans. Most people don't survive their first encounter with the kinship. You did. You faced it and spoke truth and didn't break. That's rare. Diane stood too, setting down her coffee. The fence. I still need to finish it. 7 more posts. Yeah, I've got the iron ready in the shed. Fresh concrete mix, everything you need. And the blessing? Your father blessed the posts in 1974. How? Frank walked to the shed and came back with a small bottle. Clear liquid, maybe 8 ounces. Holy water. Father Morrison blessed it in 1975. My father used it on every post he installed. Gave it to me before he died. Told me to save it for when the fence needed real repair. He handed Diane the bottle. It was heavier than it looked, the glass cold against her palm. You pour a capful into each concrete footing before the concrete sets, then mark the iron with it after the weld cools. Old ritual. Catholic, but it works for binding creatures that feed on broken bonds. Because breaking family bonds is a sin? Diane guessed. Because healing them is sacred. The kinship can't touch what's been made holy by reconciliation and forgiveness both. Frank met her eyes. You spoke forgiveness last night. That was the first half, but you need to complete it, actually reconcile, actually heal the wound. Diane knew what he was asking. I need to call Carol. Before you finish the fence, before the final posts go in, the binding will only hold if you've truly healed what the kinship was feeding on. Diane looked toward the office, toward the phone that sat on Frank's desk. 1 call. That's all it would take. Carol's number was in Houston information. She'd memorized it days ago, but calling after 8 years of silence, saying the words out loud instead of just to a water demon, actually facing the real hurt instead of the supernatural manifestation. That was harder than any midnight run through cursed water. What if she doesn't forgive me? Diane asked quietly. Then you forgive yourself anyway, and you mean it. True forgiveness doesn't require the other person's participation. It just requires you to stop carrying the weight. Frank started walking back toward the main office. Stopped. Turned. But I think she will. Forgive you, I mean. 8 years is a long time to carry anger. Most people are just waiting for someone to give them permission to let it go. He left Diane standing by the pool, the bottle of holy water in her hands, watching the morning sun climb higher. The phone call could wait until evening, after work, when she'd had time to figure out what to say. Or she could do it now. Get it over with. Face the real fear instead of the supernatural one. Diane walked to the office, sat at Frank's desk, picked up the rotary phone and dialed information. Houston, Texas. Carol Hernandez, please. The operator connected her. The phone rang 3 times. Then a voice. Familiar. Older than Diane remembered, but unmistakably Carol. Hello? Diane's throat closed. 8 years of silence pressing down on her like water. 8 years of words unsaid, apologies unspoken, pride and hurt building walls between them. Hello? Is someone there? Diane forced words past the tightness in her chest. Carol, it's me. It's Diane. Silence on the other end, long enough that Diane thought maybe Carol had hung up. Then, Diane? Her sister's voice, not the kinship's imitation, not water and malice wearing Carol's shape. Just Carol, real, alive, on the other end of the line. Yeah, it's me. I know it's been 8 years. I know I don't have the right to call out of nowhere, but I need to tell you something. More silence. Then carefully, I'm listening. And Diane spoke. Not the words she'd practiced. Not the careful apology she'd crafted in her head during sleepless hours. Just the truth. I'm sorry. For the fight. For the things I said. For wishing you'd disappear. I was angry and hurt, and I let pride poison everything between us. And I've regretted it every single day for 8 years. She could hear Carol breathing on the other end. No words yet. Just breath. Diane continued. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I was wrong. About all of it. The will, the accusations, everything. I was wrong, and you deserved better than a sister who couldn't admit it. Diane, Carol's voice was thick, like she was crying. I said terrible things, too, about you being manipulative, about you using Mom. I didn't mean them. I was hurt, and I lashed out. I know. We were both wrong. Why now? Carol asked. After 8 years, why call now? Diane looked out the office window at the pool, at the dark water sitting quiet in the morning sun. Because I almost died last night, and I realized that life's too short to carry guilt that's eating me alive, too short to let pride keep me from the people I love. You almost died? Long story, I'll tell you sometime. But Carol, Diane took a breath. Can we start over? Can we try to be sisters again? Silence. Then Carol laughed. Soft and broken and real. I'd like that. God, Diane, I'd really like that. They talked for 20 minutes, catching up on 8 years in brief strokes. Carol's marriage, her job, the house she'd bought, Diane's kids, her work, the way life had kept moving even when they weren't speaking. When Diane finally hung up, her face was wet with tears. Good tears. Clean tears. The kind that washed away 8 years of guilt like rain on dusty glass. Frank was right. Carol had been waiting. They'd both been waiting. All it took was someone brave enough to make the call. Diane wiped her eyes and walked back to the pool. The water sat perfectly still. No movement, no voices, no shapes rising from the depths. It felt different now, smaller, less powerful, because the wound it had been feeding on was healing. Diane grabbed the holy water and her tools. 7 posts left, a week of work, maybe more. And then this darkness would be bound, not destroyed. Frank was right about that too. You couldn't destroy something this old, this patient, but you could contain it. Keep it sleeping. Make sure it couldn't hurt anyone else. That was enough. Diane got to work. The fence wouldn't finish itself. But now she had something the kinship couldn't touch. She had reconciliation. She had her sister back. And that was stronger than any darkness the Hollow could throw at her.
Scene 10. Finishing the fence. The work took 6 days. 6 days of welding posts in the September heat. Sweat soaking through Diane's shirt before noon each day. 6 days of mixing concrete, pouring footings, checking levels with hands that had stopped shaking sometime around day 3. 6 days of the pool sitting quiet, watching, waiting to see if she'd really finish what she'd started. Frank worked alongside her for the first 2 days, holding posts steady while she welded, mixing concrete when her arms gave out from exhaustion. He didn't talk much, just worked with the efficiency of someone who'd been maintaining this place for years, who understood that some jobs were too important for conversation. On the 3rd day, Diane worked alone. Post 8 went in clean, the weld smooth and solid. She poured the holy water into the concrete footing before it set, watching the blessed water swirl through the gray mixture like oil in water. The bottle Frank had given her was half empty now, just enough left for the remaining posts. The pool stayed quiet during daylight hours. No voices, no shapes rising from the black water. But Diane could feel it watching, could sense the intelligence behind that stillness, calculating, measuring, waiting for her to fail. She didn't fail. Post 9 on day 4, post 10 on day 5. Each one set with concrete mixed with holy water, each iron post marked with the blessed liquid after the weld cooled. The metal hissed when the water touched it, steam rising like breath, and Diane whispered words she half remembered from childhood church services. Not quite prayers, just acknowledgement that she was doing something sacred. By day 6, only 2 posts remained. The gaps in the fence had shrunk to nothing, the perimeter nearly whole. Diane could feel the difference. The air around the pool felt heavier somehow, like the kinship was pressing against invisible walls, testing the boundaries of its prison. She called Carol every night. Short conversations at first, awkward pauses and careful words. But by the 4th night, they were laughing, really laughing, the way they had when they were kids, sharing secrets in the dark. Carol talked about her husband Miguel, about the garden she was trying to grow, about maybe driving up to visit once Diane got home. "I'd like that," Diane had said, and meant it. The forgiveness was real. She could feel it, solid and clean, nothing like the hollow words she'd spoken to the water demon. This was healing. Slow and imperfect, but real. On Wednesday morning, Diane positioned the 11th post, the second to last gap. She checked it with the level 3 times, making sure it was perfectly vertical, then fired up the welding torch. The pool erupted. Not violently, not like before, but the water rose up in a column, maybe 6 feet high, forming the shape of a woman. Carol's shape, standing at the pool's edge, watching Diane work. Diane kept welding. The torch flame roared between her and the water figure, blue and bright and hot enough to make the September air shimmer. "You can't hold us forever," the figure said. Multiple voices layered over Carol's, all the estranged families, all the broken bonds. "The fence will rust. The concrete will crack. We'll wait. Then wait." Diane finished the weld and killed the torch. She pulled out the holy water bottle and marked the iron post, steam hissing where the blessed water touched metal. "You'll be waiting a long time." The figure dissolved back into the pool with a sound like a sigh. Diane poured concrete into the footing, added the capful of holy water, watched it swirl and mix. The concrete set faster than it should have, hardening in minutes instead of hours. The holy water was doing something to it, binding it, making it stronger than normal concrete had any right to be. 1 post left. She broke for lunch, sitting on the pool house steps with a sandwich that actually tasted like food, for the first time in a week. Her body ached in that good way that came from honest work, muscles sore but satisfied. The compound looked different now, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifting slowly, degree by degree, with each post she'd installed. Frank found her there, hands in his pockets, studying the fence line. "Almost done," he said. "1 more. I'll have it in by tonight." "You did good work here. Better than I hoped." Diane looked at him. "Your father. He would have wanted this finished, wouldn't he? He died trying to finish it." Frank sat beside her on the steps. Last entry in his journal, the night he died. Said he needed to check the fence line, reinforce post 7. Never made it back. Post 7 was one of the ones I replaced. North side. Yeah, facing the creek. That's where the kinship pushes hardest, where it's closest to its source. Frank pulled out a cigarette, lit it, took a long drag. My father knew it was failing, knew he needed to repair it, but he couldn't do it alone. Needed someone who carried the wound the creature fed on. "But you said you'd reconciled with him, year before he died." "We had. But that didn't erase the estrangement we'd lived with for 5 years. The kinship still knew those years existed, still knew what we'd been to each other. And my father. Frank paused. He never forgave himself for the things he'd said when I left. He forgave me, but not himself. That's the weight that killed him. Diane thought about her phone calls with Carol, the laughter they'd shared, the plans they'd made, but also the work still ahead. The years of silence they'd have to navigate, the way healing took time even after forgiveness was spoken. I'm calling her again tonight, Diane said. Carol, my sister. We're planning a visit. Next month maybe. She wants to meet the kids. Frank smiled. That's good. That's real good. And I'm going to keep calling. Every week. Stay in touch. Make sure we don't lose each other again. Diane crushed her sandwich wrapper. Because you're right. Forgiveness isn't enough if you don't follow through. If you don't actually do the work of staying family. That's what the binding requires. Real healing, not just words. Diane stood and brushed off her jeans. Then let's finish this. The final post went in at 4 in the afternoon. Diane worked methodically, no rushing, making sure every weld was perfect. This was the last gap, the last weakness in the fence. Once this post was secured, the perimeter would be complete. The wards would be whole. The pool watched her work. The water sat perfectly still, black as oil, reflecting the afternoon sky. No shapes, no voices, just watching. Diane finished the weld and marked the iron with holy water. Steam rose, carrying the scent of metal and something else. Roses maybe, or incense, something sacred. She mixed the final batch of concrete, added the last capful of holy water from the bottle. It was empty now. The glass bottle drained completely. Just enough for 12 posts. Just enough to finish the work Frank's father had started. The concrete poured into the footing, swirling with blessed water, hardening almost immediately. Diane smoothed the surface with her trowel, making sure it was level, making sure it would hold. Then she stepped back. The fence was complete. 12 iron posts forming a perimeter around the pool, each one set in concrete mixed with holy water, each one marked with blessing. The rectangle was whole. The wards were restored. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the fence began to glow. Not bright, just a faint shimmer along the iron, like heat rising from summer pavement. The glow ran from post to post, connecting them, forming a circuit, a barrier, a binding. The pool rippled, once, twice, then went perfectly still. Diane could feel the difference immediately. The weight in the air lifted. A sense of being watched disappeared. The hollow stopped holding its breath. The kinship was bound, not destroyed. It was still down there, in that black water, patient as stone, but contained now, held back by iron and concrete and holy water and the sacred work of reconciliation. Frank appeared beside her, studying the fence. He walked the perimeter slowly, checking each post, testing each weld. When he completed the circuit, he nodded once. It's done. My father can rest now. Diane gathered her tools, loaning them into the truck bed one last time. The welding torch, the level, the hammer that had saved her life. Everything going home with her, back to Houston, back to her real life. But she'd leave something here too. The proof that she'd faced darkness and hadn't broken. That she'd spoken forgiveness and meant it. That she'd done the work of healing instead of just hiding from the wound. The fence will need maintenance, Frank said. Year or two, maybe. Iron rusts, concrete cracks. Nothing lasts forever. Then I'll come back. Diane surprised herself by meaning it. Check on it. Make sure it's holding. This is important work. It is. And Diane, Frank extended his hand. Thank you for finishing what no one else could finish. They shook hands. Then Diane climbed into her truck and started the engine. The compound sat quiet in the late afternoon sun. The pool reflected the sky, dark and still and contained. The fence stood solid, 12 iron posts marking the boundary between the world and what lived beneath. Diane drove away from Ironwood Retreat with the windows down, September air washing over her face. She'd call Carol from the road, tell her about finishing the job, make plans for that visit next month. And she'd keep calling, every week, stay connected, do the work of being sisters again. Because that was the real binding, not iron and concrete and holy water, but family choosing to stay family, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. That's what kept the darkness at bay. Not walls, but love that refused to be broken twice. Scene 11. The phone call. Diane pulled into a rest stop 40 miles from Ironwood Retreat and sat in the truck with the engine running, staring at the payphone near the bathrooms. She'd called Carol every night for the past week. Short conversations, feeling their way back to each other through 8 years of silence. But those had been late-night calls, safe in Unit 4, with the darkness outside giving her courage she didn't feel in daylight. This call was different. This was the call she'd been putting off. The one where she said everything she'd been carrying, not just apologies, the whole truth. Diane cut the engine and walked to the payphone. Scene 11. The phone call. Diane pulled into a rest stop 40 miles from Ironwood Retreat and sat in the truck with the engine running, staring at the payphone near the bathrooms. She'd called Carol every night for the past week. Short conversations, feeling their way back to each other through 8 years of silence. But those had been late-night calls, safe in Unit 4, with the darkness outside giving her courage she didn't feel in daylight. This call was different. This was the call she'd been putting off. The one where she said everything she'd been carrying, not just apologies, the whole truth. Diane cut the engine and walked to the payphone, dropped coins in the slot, dialed Carol's number from memory. 3 rings, 4. Hello? Carol, it's me again. Diane, you okay? You sound... Carol paused. Different. I finished the job. The fence. It's done. Diane leaned against the phone booth, watching trucks rumble past on the highway. I'm heading home. Gonna take a few days. It's a long drive. That's great. That's really great. Relief in Carol's voice. So you'll be back in Houston by, what, the weekend? Yeah, Saturday morning if I push it, maybe Sunday. I'll take it slow. Stop when I need to. I've got some thinking to do anyway. Diane took a breath. Carol, I need to tell you something. About that fight. About what really happened. Silence on the other end. Then, carefully. Okay, I was angry about Mom's will. You know that. We both were. But it wasn't really about the money. It was never about the money. The words came easier than Diane expected. She'd been practicing them in her head for days. I was jealous. Jealous? You were Mom's favorite. Always were. The pretty one. The smart one. The one who did everything right. I was the screw-up. The one who got pregnant at 19. Who married the wrong guy. Who could barely keep a roof over her kids' heads. Diane's throat tightened. And when Mom showed us her will, when I saw she'd left you more, it felt like proof. Like confirmation that I'd failed at being the daughter she wanted. Diane, that's not... Carol's voice cracked. That's not true. Mom loves you. You know she does. I know she does. But that's how it felt at the time. And instead of saying that, instead of being honest about how much it hurt, I lashed out, accused you of manipulation, said you'd turned Mom against me. Said terrible things I didn't mean. You said you wished I'd disappear. The words hung between them, carried across telephone wires and 8 years of silence. I did, and I've regretted it every single day since. Diane wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Because you did disappear. You left that night, and we never spoke again. And that was my fault. All of it was my fault. Not all of it. Carol's voice was thick with tears. I said awful things too. Called you selfish. Said you were trying to manipulate Mom. Accused you of playing the victim when you were just trying to survive. Raising 2 kids alone. Working yourself to the bone. I should have helped you. Instead, I judged you. We both did things wrong. Yeah, we did. A truck rumbled past, air brakes hissing. Diane watched it go, then continued. That place I've been working, Ironwood Retreat. Something happened there. Something that made me face what I'd been carrying, and I realized. She paused, choosing words carefully. I realized that guilt doesn't go away just because you bury it. It grows. It festers. It becomes something worse than the original wound. What happened there? Diane almost told her, almost said I fought a water demon that wore your face and tried to drown me in my own guilt. But that was too much. Too strange. Carol would think she'd lost her mind. I had to face some hard truths. About myself. About what I'd done to us. And I learned that forgiveness only works if you actually do something with it. If you don't just speak it, but live it. And trying to do that. Carol's voice was soft. Forgive you. Forgive myself. It's harder than I thought it would be. I know. Me too. They were both quiet for a moment. Diane could hear Carol breathing on the other end. Could imagine her standing in her kitchen in Houston. Phone cord wrapped around her finger the way she used to do. When they were kids. Tell me about Miguel. Diane said. Really tell me. How'd you meet? What's he like? Carol laughed, surprised. You want to hear about my husband? I want to hear about your life. 8 years of life I missed. Everything. So Carol told her. About meeting Miguel at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. About his terrible jokes that somehow made her laugh anyway. About the wedding that Diane hadn't been invited to because they weren't speaking. About the house they'd bought with the garden that refused to grow anything but weeds. Diane listened, really listened, asking questions and laughing in the right places. And then she told Carol about her own 8 years. About Danny's soccer obsession, about Sarah's love of books, about the divorce that had been messy but necessary, about learning to do contractor work when no one wanted to hire a woman, about proving herself on job sites until the quality of her work spoke louder than her gender. An hour passed, then another. Diane fed more coins into the payphone. Leaning against the booth, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Do you remember Lake Conroe? Carol asked suddenly. That summer before Dad died? Of course, you almost drowned. You saved me, pulled me out of the water when I got caught in the undertow. I was so scared, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. And then your hand grabbed mine and pulled me up. Diane remembered. Carol's face underwater, eyes wide with terror. The way her small hand had felt in Diane's grip. Cold and desperate. The relief when they'd both made it to shore, collapsing on the sand while their parents ran toward them. I never thanked you for that, Carol said quietly. Never said it out loud, but I've thought about it a lot over the years, how you didn't hesitate, just dove in and pulled me out. You're my sister, that's what sisters do. Yeah, it is. Carol paused. So when are you coming to visit, really? Next month? Late October, maybe? I'll bring the kids. They need to meet their aunt. I'd like that. Miguel's been wanting to meet them too. He keeps asking why I don't talk to my sister. Now I can finally tell him. Tell him I'm sorry it took so long. I will. But Diane, I'm sorry too. For the things I said, for not reaching out, for letting pride keep me from picking up the phone. We both let pride win. Not anymore, though. Not anymore, Carol agreed. They talked for another 20 minutes, making plans, trading memories. Rebuilding bridges, one word at a time. When Diane finally hung up, the sun had set completely and the rest stop lights had flickered on, casting orange pools across the parking lot. She stood by the payphone for a moment, hands still on the receiver, feeling lighter than she had in years. The wound wasn't completely healed. 8 years of silence couldn't be undone in a few phone calls and good intentions. But it was healing, really healing. And that was enough. Diane walked back to her truck and climbed in, started the engine, pulled back onto the highway, heading south toward Houston, toward home, toward her kids and her mother, and the life waiting for her there. The darkness she'd left behind at Ironwood Retreat stayed behind, bound by iron and concrete and holy water. But more than that, bound by the healing she'd done, the forgiveness she'd spoken and meant, the reconciliation she'd chosen to pursue instead of letting guilt consume her. The kinship couldn't feed on healed bonds, couldn't touch family that chose to stay family. That was the real binding, not the fence, but the choice to love despite the hurt, to forgive despite the wound, to be sisters again despite 8 years of silence. Diane drove through the night with the radio playing softly, thinking about Carol's laugh, about the visit they'd planned, about Danny and Sarah finally getting to know their aunt. She stopped at a motel somewhere in Tennessee, slept for 6 hours, then got back on the road. The miles rolled past, Kentucky, Arkansas, the landscape changing as she drove south and west. By the time she crossed into Texas 2 days later, Gahalo and its darkness felt like something from another life, far away, contained. About the photograph from Lake Conroe that she'd kept all these years, 2 little girls with their arms around each other, sisters forever. It had been true then. It was true now. The water couldn't change that. Nothing could. Diane smiled and drove toward home, leaving the hollow and its darkness far behind, where it belonged. Scene 12, The Departure. Diane pulled into her driveway in Houston on Saturday morning, the F-150 rattling over familiar concrete after 3 days on the road. The smell of her neighborhood washed over her like a homecoming. Cut grass and car exhaust and the faint scent of someone grilling breakfast. Normal smells, safe smells, nothing like creek water and rot. Her mother's car sat in the driveway already. Of course it did. Mom had probably been here since dawn, making sure the house was clean and the kids were fed and everything was perfect for Diane's return. Danny exploded out the front door before Diane had fully parked, all knees and elbows and 10-year-old enthusiasm. "Mom, Mom, you're back!" Diane climbed out of the truck and caught him as he launched himself at her, wrapping her arms around his solid, real, living warmth. Not a water demon wearing his shape. Just her son. Really here, really safe. "Hey, baby, I missed you." "I missed you too. Can we get the cleats today? Coach said we have practice Monday and I really need them, and..." "Yes, we'll get the cleats today." Diane ruffled his hair. "Where's your sister?" Sarah appeared in the doorway, more reserved than her brother, but her smile was genuine. 11 years old and already showing signs of the teenager she'd become. She walked down the steps and hugged Diane carefully, like she wasn't sure if it was allowed. "You were gone a long time," Sarah said quietly. "I know. 3 weeks. It was a big job." Diane kissed the top of her head. "But I'm home now, and I finished it. Got paid. We're good." Her mother appeared behind Sarah, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Margaret Matthews, 68, and stubborn as iron, studying Diane with that X-ray vision mothers developed after raising 2 daughters through adolescence and adulthood. "You look different," her mother said. "Just tired, Mom." "No, different." Margaret descended the steps and pulled Diane into a hug that smelled like her childhood. Lavender soap and coffee and safety. Something happened. Diane almost denied it, almost brushed it off as exhaustion and 3 weeks of hard labor. But her mother deserved truth. Something did happen. But it's okay now. I'll tell you about it later, after the kids. After the kids are occupied. Margaret nodded. She'd raised 2 daughters. She understood code. "I made breakfast. Pancakes. Your favorite." They ate on the back porch, Diane letting the normality of it wash over her. Danny talking nonstop about soccer and school and the kid in his class who'd brought a snake for show and tell. Sarah, quieter but present, asking careful questions about the job, about where Diane had stayed, about whether the work had been hard. It was hard, Diane admitted, but good, important work, fixing something that needed fixing. After breakfast, Margaret shooed the kids inside to clean their rooms and turned to Diane with that look that meant she wasn't leaving until she got answers. What happened out there? Diane stared at her coffee. How did you explain fighting a water demon that fed on family estrangement? How did you tell your mother about drowning in 3 feet of water that shouldn't have been deep enough to kill? I called Carol, she said finally. Margaret's hand stilled on her coffee cup. You called your sister? Every night for the past week. We talked, really talked, about the fight, about the things we said, about— Diane took a breath. About healing what we broke 8 years ago. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. Diane, I know, I should have done it years ago. Should have been brave enough to pick up the phone and admit I was wrong. But I wasn't. Not until— She paused. Not until I had to face what that silence was doing to me, what it was costing. And Carol? How is she? Good. She's good. Married to a guy named Miguel. Works as a nurse. Lives in a house with a garden that won't grow. Diane smiled. She wants to visit. Next month, bring Miguel, meet the kids. Margaret set down her coffee and pulled Diane into another hug, this one fierce and tight and full of 8 years of worry. I'm so glad, so glad. I've been praying for this, for you girls to find your way back to each other. I'm sorry it took so long. What matters is you did it. That's what matters. Margaret pulled back, studying Diane's face. But there's something else. Something you're not telling me. Diane thought about the pool, the water, the voices, the way Carol's face had looked rising from black water and algae, eyes like holes and mouth full of accusations. There was a pool at the place I was working. Old, stagnant. Something lived in it. Something that used Carol's voice to try to— She stopped. How did you say it without sounding insane? To make me face what I'd done. The guilt I'd been carrying. The estrangement. Her mother didn't laugh. Didn't tell her she was being ridiculous. Just nodded slowly, like this made perfect sense. Your grandmother used to say that guilt calls to guilt. That broken things seek out other broken things. Did you fix it? Whatever was in that pool? I contained it. Built a fence. Iron and concrete, and— Diane touched her pocket, where a small piece of iron still sat, a reminder. And forgiveness. Real forgiveness. That's what it took to bind it. Then you did the work. Margaret squeezed her hand. The real work. And you came home whole. I came home whole, Diane agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee and watching the neighborhood wake up fully. A dog barked somewhere down the street. A car started. Normal Saturday sounds that Diane had missed desperately during 3 weeks in the Hollow. After a while, Sarah appeared with a question about homework, and Danny needed help finding his soccer ball, and normal life resumed its normal rhythm. Diane spent the day unpacking, doing laundry, running errands, getting cleats for Danny, buying Sarah the book she'd been wanting, fixing the squeaky hinge on the back door that had been annoying her mother for weeks. Small things, normal things, the mundane work of living. But Diane approached it differently now. Present, grateful, not running from anything or burying anything, just living with what she carried instead of letting it drown her. That night, after the kids were in bed, Diane sat on the back porch with a drink and called Carol one more time. Just wanted to say goodnight, Diane said when her sister answered. Let you know I made it home safe. I'm glad. The kids doing okay? They're good, excited to meet you next month. Danny won't stop talking about it. Carol laughed. I'm excited too, nervous, but excited. Me too, but Carol? Diane took a sip of Coke. Thank you for answering the phone, for listening, for being willing to try again. Thank you for calling, for being brave enough to say it out loud. The apology, the truth, all of it. They talked for a few more minutes, making final plans for the visit, trading goodnights. When Diane hung up, she sat on the porch for a while longer, listening to the neighborhood settle into sleep. Inside,
Her family was safe. Her kids were healthy. Her mother's furnace was fixed. Bills were paid. Life was ordinary and beautiful and perfectly normal. But Diane carried something new now. Not guilt, not regret, just knowledge. She knew what lived in standing water, knew what fed on broken families and unspoken apologies, knew that some darkness had to be contained instead of destroyed, and she knew the fence at Ironwood Retreat would need checking. Year or two, maybe, when iron rusted and concrete cracked and wards started failing again. She'd go back when that time came, would maintain what she'd built. Keep the darkness contained, do the work that Frank and his father had done before her. But not because she was running from anything, because some work was important, sacred, even. The work of keeping darkness at bay so families could heal without fear, so siblings could reconcile without water demons wearing their faces, so love could exist without being devoured by guilt. Diane finished her drink and went inside, locked the door, hung the small piece of iron above the frame, just to be safe. Then she checked on her kids, kissed their sleeping foreheads, and went to bed in her own house, with her own family safe around her. The water was far away. The darkness was contained. And tomorrow she'd call Carol again, because that's what sisters did. They stayed connected. They chose family. They refused to let silence win twice. That was the real binding. That was the real strength, not iron, but love that kept choosing itself, day after day, phone call after phone call, despite the distance and despite the hurt. Diane fell asleep smiling, dreaming of Carol's visit, of her kids meeting their aunt, of healing that would take time but was already begun. The hollow and its darkness felt very far away, exactly where it belonged. Epilogue. Blood calls to blood. October brought color to Houston in small ways. Trees that never quite committed to autumn, dropping a few yellow leaves. The temperature dipping to something almost cool in the evenings. The smell of someone burning leaves, even though the neighbors all complained. Diane stood in her kitchen, washing dishes on a Tuesday evening, hands in soapy water, while Sarah set the table for dinner. Carol and Miguel were due in 20 minutes. First visit. First time in 8 years that sisters would share a meal. Danny was in the living room, supposedly doing homework, but probably reading comics. Her mother had gone home an hour ago, giving them space, but promising to come over tomorrow to see Carol properly. Everything was ready. Pot roast in the oven. Table set. House clean. Nothing left to do but wait and try not to be nervous. The doorbell rang at exactly 6. Diane dried her hands and walked to the door, took a breath. Opened it. Carol stood on the porch, older than Diane remembered, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 8 years ago, hair shorter but still the same dark brown. And beside her, a man who had to be Miguel. Stocky, kind eyes, holding a casserole dish of deviled eggs like a peace offering. For a moment, the sisters just looked at each other. 8 years of silence hanging between them like fog. Then Carol smiled, that same smile from childhood. Genuine and reaching her eyes. Hi. Diane stepped aside. Come in, please. Carol entered first, looking around the house like she was memorizing it. Miguel followed, offering his hand to Diane. Miguel Hernandez, I've heard a lot about you. Diane Matthews, same, all good things I hope. Mostly, he grinned, and Diane could see why Carol had fallen for him. Danny appeared from the living room, suddenly shy in the presence of strangers. Diane put a hand on his shoulder. This is Danny, my son. And Sarah's around here somewhere. Danny, this is your Aunt Carol. Carol knelt down to Danny's level, her eyes bright. Hi, Danny. Your mom tells me you play soccer. Yeah, I'm a forward. I scored 3 goals last week. That's amazing. Maybe you can tell me about it over dinner. Danny nodded, some of his shyness evaporating. Sarah emerged from her room, more cautious,
studying Carol like a puzzle she was trying to solve. They moved to the dining room. Diane served pot roast and vegetables, while Miguel told stories about his work as a contractor, which got Danny asking questions about building houses. Carol and Sarah talked about books, finding common ground in a fantasy series they'd both read. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward pauses, moments where the weight of 8 years pressed down and made conversation stumble. But it was real. They were trying. That's what mattered. After dinner, while Miguel and the kids played cards in the living room, Carol helped Diane with dishes. They stood side by side at the sink, the warm water and quiet domestic task making conversation easier somehow. "Your kids are wonderful," Carol said, handing Diane a plate to rinse. "They are. I got lucky." Diane set the plate in the drying rack. "Thank you for coming, for being willing to try this. Thank you for calling, for," Carol paused, choosing words carefully, "for saving me." Again, Diane looked at her. "What do you mean?" "That summer at Lake Canaro, you pulled me out of the water when I was drowning, and 3 weeks ago, you called me when we were both drowning in silence. You saved me twice. We saved each other, this time." Carol handed her another plate. "That job you did, out in the middle of nowhere, did it really have something to do with us, with what happened between us?" Diane thought about the pool, the water. The thing that had worn Carol's face and spoken with Carol's voice and known everything about their fight except the healing that came after. Yeah, it did. There was something there that fed on estrangement, on broken families. And I couldn't fight it until I faced what I'd broken between us. "Something supernatural?" Carol asked carefully. "Something old, something patient." Diane rinsed the last plate and dried her hands. "But I contained it, built a fence. And the fence will hold as long as," she paused. "As long as we hold, as long as we stay family." Carol turned to face her fully. "We are family, always were, even when we weren't speaking. Even when we were too proud to admit we missed each other. We're sisters. Blood calls to blood, right?" The phrase made Diane's skin prickle. That's what the kinship had said, screamed at her through water and darkness. Blood calls to blood. But Carol was using it differently, not as a threat, as a promise, as acknowledgement that family ties existed, whether you honored them or ignored them. And the only choice was whether to let them bind you to each other or bind you to guilt. "Right," Diane agreed. "Blood calls to blood." From the living room came laughter. Miguel had apparently lost at cards and Danny was celebrating loudly. Sarah was explaining the rules of some complicated game she'd invented. Normal sounds, family sounds. Carol smiled and walked toward the living room, drawn by the warmth there. Diane followed, but stopped at the kitchen window first. Looked out at her backyard, at the bird bath she kept filled with fresh water, at the small garden where she grew tomatoes and herbs. No shapes in the water, no faces looking back. The binding held. Diane turned away from the window and joined her family in the living room. Sat between her kids on the couch, while Carol and Miguel took the chairs opposite. They played cards until 10, trading stories and laughter, and the comfortable rhythms of people learning to be family again. When Carol and Miguel finally left, with promises to visit again soon and plans for Thanksgiving, Diane stood on the porch and watched them drive away. The October night was cool and clear. Stars visible even through Houston's light pollution. The neighborhood quiet except for distant traffic and someone's television playing too loud. Everything normal. Everything safe. But Diane knew the darkness was still out there. In a pool at Ironwood Retreat, bound by iron and concrete and holy water. Patient as stone. Waiting for the fence to rust, for the wards to fail, for someone new to arrive carrying the weight of estrangement. It would wait a long time. Because Diane would check on it, would maintain the fence, would make sure the binding held, not out of fear, out of responsibility, because she'd done the work of containing it. And that work required upkeep. Same as any important work, same as family. Diane went inside and locked the door, checked the small piece of iron above the frame, a habit now. Then checked on the kids, kissed them goodnight, and went to her own room. Before bed, she pulled out the photograph from Lake Canaro. 2 little girls with their arms around each other's shoulders, standing in water that sparkled with summer sun. Sisters forever, written on the back in Carol's neat handwriting. Diane set it on her nightstand where she could see it. A reminder, a promise, a binding stronger than iron. She fell asleep thinking about Thanksgiving plans, about Carol's laughter, about her kids getting to know their aunt, about healing that took time but was worth every minute. The water stayed where it belonged. The darkness stayed contained. And blood called to blood, not as a curse, but as a gift. A choice to answer, to stay connected, to be family despite everything. Diane slept peacefully, dreaming of autumn leaves and family dinners and the ordinary magic of reconciliation. In the hollow, 1,100 miles north, the pool at Ironwood Retreat sat quiet under the October moon. The fence stood solid, 12 iron posts gleaming faintly in the darkness. The wards held strong, and in the black water at the pool's bottom, something ancient and patient settled deeper into sleep, dreaming of the next estrangement, the next broken family, the next wound to feed on. But that would be years away, maybe decades. The binding was strong, the fence would hold, and somewhere in Houston, 2 sisters were learning to be family again. That was stronger than any darkness. That was the real magic, not iron, but love choosing itself again, and again, and again.